No.
Okay, super.
No.
Okay, so I'm pleased to say we are now live. Welcome back to everyone to the EU-Canada Business Summit. This is the International Trade and Mobility panel. I have the pleasure of welcoming Chris Cooter, who's the head of mission at Mission Canada to the EU, Chris Cooter, and also the pleasure of welcoming Dominic Boucsein. You can correct me the way I pronounce your surname, actually. The head of international trade at the Eurochambres. I will let both Dominic and Chris introduce themselves. So I will start with you, Chris, and then we'll move on to you, Dominic, if that's okay.
Okay. Thanks very much, Marina. Merci à tous. Merci à Sam. Merci à the Canada EU Economic Chamber. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let me just say happy birthday, CETA, because I'd like to speak a bit about our trade arrangement. It's 3 years old this month. And I'd just like to make 3 points, if I can. First of all, just to point out that in our view, okay? Okay. First, let me just point out that in our view, CETA is working quite well. It's, trade is down since COVID began about 12%, which is a big thing for Canada because about 1/3 of it is related to trade. It's a little bit higher for the EU, I think. And yet, in spite of that, CETA's value is being proven in this economic difficulty. We actually have had a drop in trade of about 16%. EU, it's down 7%. So a significant difference. And I think that's due to the framework of CETA. It's a baby, it's only 3 years old, but it's really started to establish linkages between our businesses and the framework itself gives us a chance to talk about the problems and to resolve. So who heard Minister Eng, our Minister of Trade and Small Business this morning, you would have heard some of the figures. But they are surprisingly strong. Since 2016, we've seen an overall 21% increase and amounts to about $165 billion trade last year. So you're our partner now. And it's both goods, which have gone up about 17%, and it's also services. So close to 9.5%. And although the investment chapter of CETA isn't even in force, we've seen a similar increase in investment going both to the EU and to Canada. It's up about 16%, about $305 billion now in each of the EU and Canada. So in spite of COVID, things have gone surprisingly well. In fact, since March, we've even had significant increases in our trade with Germany, with Italy, and France. So the question is, why is that? And I think one obvious reason is that all the economically significant parts of the agreement are now in force. So 98% of tariffs have been eliminated. We've seen that where they are eliminated, that's where we've got the greatest export. So if you were subject to a tariff between 5 and 10%, what we see now is sectors are up by 40% or more. I think as well, the agreement has some pretty high standards. It's a modern agreement. It took into account gender, it took into account development concerns, environmental concerns. We built a sizable architecture of 19 dialogues. Sounds like a lot. But those dialogues, which are between our departments and the different parts of the commission, they deal with the irritants. and they compare policy notes and they look ahead. And they've all met at least twice in the 2 years. Some of them have met 3 times. All of that package, I think, has increased awareness in Canada of the EU. That's what we found with other trade agreements. There's a kind of a so that's probably happened. With that, we've had a summit. We've had lots of ministerial level meetings. So there's a lot of talk about the EU. The image of the EU in Canada is very positive. I think it's the same in the EU as well for vis-a-vis Canada. So there's a push, but we're also being pushed together because some of our partners are putting up protectionist barriers, are less inclined to support multilateral rules, and frankly, it's a bit more difficult to access some of the other markets. So you have this push and pull factor. What's also very encouraging about what's happened in the last 3 years with CETA is that the trade isn't all in one thing. We were overly concentrated. We might find that the goods trade is diminished, but the services has increased. That's not the case. We've seen resilience in all areas, resources and manufacturers, goods and services. So that's actually put this on a solid basis when times like today. We're also getting some momentum, we think, because the number of businesses that are benefiting from CETA, the number of jobs has significantly increased. According to the EU website, about 800,000 jobs actually benefit from CETA. It's about 14,000 jobs per 1 billion euro in exports. Probably the same on the Canadian side. That are being created or supported are the higher paying jobs. So you get more momentum from that. It's also, as I said, a broad-based sectorally. We have automotive, aluminum, minerals, and into Europe, it's also broad-based geographically. So Germany, Ireland, the Netherlands, Latvia, Italy, trade has gone up with all of them. So it's not just 1 or 2 countries. The same applies on the Canadian. Of our 13 provinces and territories have actually had increases, with Newfoundland actually and Labrador actually doubling its exports. So lots of examples out there. I mentioned a couple this morning where companies that would not have looked at the EU market and certainly would not have benefited, now not having to face a tariff are doing well. So we have a couple in the garment, several in the garment area. One called Quartz Co. makes luxury outworkers, that kind of thing. EU CETA eliminated the 13% garment tariff. Now the market for them. They've got 2 new Quebec factories. And on the other side, we have Creative Education of Canada benefited from the tariff reduction. And now it has a new warehouse in Hamburg. It's got a new EU subsidiary. There are companies and sectors that never would have gone into the EU now doing well. So what I would say on that point is that we've all benefited from the CETA effect, which is stability, access to a big market, and a kind of a complementarity in goods and services. And in fact, off that point, in June, at the height of the first, at least the first wave of COVID, we had our export development corporation say that confidence among exporters was at an all-time low. But only with the EU was there an actual uptick in exporter confidence, and I think since June that's carried on. So I think we're doing well. Just quickly go ahead, a couple of other points where we kind of go from here. If I can take a couple more minutes. It's not just a set of trade rules. It's actually a foundation and a set of building blocks were there so that it can change a bit. So if you bring in a new health, for example, in the pandemic, or a new region that's important, we can adjust the architecture to make that more of a priority. And e-commerce is a good example. We're talking more and more about that in things like the digital dialogues, which we held 2 weeks ago. Health, an example of health, we're adjusting. We have a $54 million COVID rapid research funding opportunity. Now 9 of the companies, well, 10% of the companies are actually EU companies that are taking advantage of that funding. So that I think is especially useful for both private sector priorities and public sector priorities. And I should say on that both last week we had our speech from the throne, which is our government. The week before it was the State of the Union speech. It was very interesting to see the alignment in the policy directions of the big government frame is very similar, under which private sector can find opportunities. And that applies in learning about things like the macro environment in COVID, where our dialogues can talk about, well, what are you doing to support businesses, small businesses? What are you doing to support e-commerce and so on? One other point on COVID, that a lot of talk open, what's now called open autonomy. That in Canada too. I think around personal equipment, concern that we didn't have enough supply sources abroad. But I think to paraphrase what Commissioner Hogan said while he was still in the job of Trade Commissioner, we have free trade agreements. We can't any of us be entirely autonomous. We have to work with those free trade agreements with our trusted partners, and we can address those strategic issues, those strategic sectors, make sure our supply chains aren't at risk. And that's what we're really talking about with Canada as a trusted partner, and it's a basis for moving through the COVID recovery and on. I should say as well that one of the things that's with this architecture that we have, which has both the functional side, technical side, but also the political side to the strategic partnership, is that we were able to compare positions on multilateral issues. So a lot of probably concerned about the WTO for there. Well, we had a group called the Ottawa Group in the WTO, and we worked closely with the EU in discussing how we're going to proceed in multilateral forum. There are others. There's the G7, there's the G20, there's OECD, etc. And I think we've been brought together, and we now know each other better. We know our positions better, so that we can coordinate better in those forums.
I don't mean to be interrupting you. For some reason, we've lost you. So we can hear you, but we can't see you. So I don't know whether you want to try and reconnect. Otherwise, we'll keep listening. It's a shame if we can't see you.
Can you hear me now?
I can definitely hear you. It's just unfortunately I can't see you, which means that the audience will be unable to see you. So maybe Alexandra will give you a quick call to help you.
Okay. Would you, if I can continue, I'll just make a couple of points and then.
Please do.
Okay. So just a couple of things about how we can make CETA and our arrangement even better. So a big focus, you probably heard it from, is on how we have SMEs better access the agreement. And a lot of that is about getting more information to our small and medium enterprise. And in that connection, both the EU and Canada have a shared interest. And we've done a number of things, such as creating Canada's tariff finder online, the EU Enterprise Europe network in Canada now. We are devoting our trade commissioner resources to that objective. And I would say that one of the issues that we're looking at the mission in Brussels is how we can better assist our business to look at the EU as a whole. Because right now we're more set up so that businesses go to Berlin, they go to Madrid, they go to Rome for our. We're trying to give them more assistance in looking at the EU as a single market. Red tape. That's one of the priorities behind our objectives at the mission and elsewhere. We have a CETA Canada Regulatory Cooperation Forum, and it's made some good progress. It met actually last in February. We have a joint ministerial recommendation on
Okay, so I'm afraid we've lost Chris. We've lost the sound, but we do have the picture. So thankfully, it's not a bad picture of him. So that's good. So maybe I'll just, if you don't mind, and I apologize to the audience, we'll just wait a few seconds. And if not, Dominic, there are already quite a few topics in there, which I'm sure you want to discuss, but what would be good is for the audience to get to know you. So if you don't mind giving a brief description of who you are, what drives you, and what your days are like a little bit. And then we'll, voila, we've totally lost Chris Cooter, but so it's between the two of us and the audience. And yes, the audience, please feel free to email us questions. We'll take them with great pleasure at the end of this panel. So Dominic, I will let you introduce yourself, and then we'll start developing on those topics, which Chris has kindly made a great opening statement, actually, which is very helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks, Melina, for that, and thank you to the Canada Europe Economic Chamber and to Ayoub for having me. It's a great pleasure. As you mentioned, I'm Dominic Boucsein, actually a German with a French last name, so you can sign it. So it's either way. They had an international trade and foreign policy at Eurochambres, so we're basically dealing with all the issues with third countries for the European business community from the chamber perspective, and that is of course a very wide portfolio with many different things going on at the moment all over the world. We're just talking about it just before the session on how many topics right now are ongoing, and Chris also alluded to it in the kind of trade review that is going on. We have the commissioner, a new designate that has his hearing also this week. So there's really a lot going on. And in this, I'm also I was an active member of the advisory group on trade agreements that was established under Commissioner Malmström under the last commission, and also in various domestic advisory groups, including, of course, with CETA in Canada. And we had a very productive meetings earlier this month on with both sides coming together and discussing different elements on CETA implementation and on trade and sustainability, and also had a joint statement coming out of that. So, and overall, as chambers, I mean, Eurochambres represents the chambers of commerce in the EU and abroad. We have 42 members, direct national chambers, and representing total over 20 million businesses, and a lot of that is SMEs, and this is what Chris also was alluding to, and which I very much share this focus. And a key point for us is that is of course always international trade, and chambers stand for free, fair, and inclusive trade. In fact, it's very much something that is in our DNA as European business, because ever since the start of the European project, trading across borders, and that was in the EU, was always a key driver. And now, of course, it's of prime importance to project that abroad, and as well with such a key partner as Canada. But I think it's also very important that we see this relationship through the lens of COVID. Of course, this is at the moment, of course, an unprecedented economic crisis, and has introduced a huge level of shock to the global economies, to our supply chains, and as well a great deal of uncertainty into international business. And I think it's also accelerated some of the trends that were already simmering in the background. I mean, such as the US-China standoff, you have the digitization of our economies, issues how to fight climate change and low carbon solution, and all of that. So I think it has also been like an accelerator. Chris has mentioned to some of the numbers, the global trade decline is very significant. We could be looking at something that is even more severe than during the financial crisis. Also, global FDIs flows are set to drop off a cliff. Thankfully, not as much with Canada, but we're also looking, according to the latest summer economic forecast, into a GDP drop that could be around 8% for 2020. So this is very much, let's say, very challenging environment for European business, and I think for our Canadian businesses as well. So I think more than ever, our FTAs and with CETA are really anchors of stability in this crisis. And I think this is one of the most precious elements for business at the moment, is predictability and stability that these agreements provide. And I think the crisis is also a very important element for us to reflect upon what kind of trade we want. But I think it's very important that we do not disengage from international trade or use this crisis as a pretext for protectionist tendencies, which we see are arising across the globe. So if we just look internally, I think that will be very detrimental to our businesses and to the effectiveness of the global economic recovery. At the moment, as I was mentioning, the Commission has launched a consultation on the new trade strategy on open strategic economy, where we balance the different elements that come to play. That was mentioned already: the resilience, diversification, the Green Deal, and how that links to trade and foreign policy. So there's a lot of things that come in which we're actively debating on also internally. This is a very important element. But I think the important thing, and for Europe, we are probably one of the most interconnected regions and are most dependent on access to foreign markets. So it's very important that we maintain also this access. And for me, I think it's also an opportunity, this crisis, and Chris was mentioning it, that we deepen our partnership with like-minded partners or trusted partners, as he was saying, and Canada is really in the front of this. And I think it's great that now in this crisis, we already have a platform such as CETA, which we can operate on and which we can build on to address some of the global challenges that we're facing: multilateralism, crisis there, increased cooperation in R&D for new technologies that will like transform our societies and economies in years to come. And I think it's always important then in this debate to recall how important trade is for the European business community. Right now, I think 36 million jobs in Europe are dependent on exports, and that's 2/3 more than 2000. And it's very also equitably distributed. I mean, 14 million of these jobs are held by women, and 13 million of these jobs are created by small and medium-sized enterprises. So that's also like a much bigger than we tend to think. But that is also not to mention all the jobs that are created by our imports and about the foreign direct investment in the European Union of around 4.5 trillion, and around 200,000 jobs that in Europe are there thanks to Canadian investment in the European Union. So I think that is very, very, very important. And I think also going forward in CETA, one of our key focuses is always the SME community and how SMEs can profit from these agreements. And I think we all know the importance of the SMEs in terms of job creation. 2/3 of private sector jobs in Europe are created by small and medium-sized enterprises. They are more competitive and more innovative if they export. They do export more, having an FTA, of course, notably more than if they do not. So this is very important. But I think two areas I wanted to highlight, I think very interesting, that SMEs are also critical in two of the priorities now of the Commission going forward, that is digital and climate change. And it's been found that SMEs are very competitive, digitally intensive goods, where not all new firms are equally competitive. And also SMEs have a very good track record in terms of lower greenhouse gas emissions. And I think it's been found that 70% of SME exports are belonging more to the low emission intensity. So for all these reasons, it is very, very important that now going forward that we have such a great agreement about CETA, and Chris was mentioning the figures of how it is working, that we now focus on the implementation and getting it, especially to our small and medium-sized enterprises. And as chambers, but all across the EU, we're doing a lot in terms of training, capacity building, and bringing those benefits closer to our SMEs.
I agree, and I do. I mean, we've clearly seen the benefits of CETA, and although it's still young and it's only 3 years old, while the COVID has certainly put it to the test and showed its strength, and the smaller businesses can indeed benefit from it, and they certainly need to hear more from it, and it needs we need access. All of those businesses and entrepreneurs who are building those businesses and getting new jobs and all of these things, because it's usually the larger firms, but it's really great to hear that the smaller and medium-sized firms can also benefit from CETA. And I think there are two key words. I've heard actually, stability and resilience. And now going forward, having learned from this whole COVID experience, we actually are going to now move forward to some questions, if that's all right, with the both of you. There are already some questions from the panel, but I will take those in the last 15 minutes. So we still have a bit of time for some of the questions, which we're looking a lot at, obviously, the relationship between Canada and Europe. But one of the questions is, with the current situation with the COVID and the economic trade war between US and China, can Canada be a more forcing place to invest in the future for Europeans? Because we've heard a lot about how CETA has benefited Europeans and Canadians, but it's true that Canada has a history of trading a lot more with the US and China. So I'm actually curious to hear your views on this. First, you, Chris, and then Dominic, you're welcome to jump in.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Absolutely, much better now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, yes. Needless to say, I think it would be great if there was more European investment in Canada. As I said, it's actually gone pretty well since 2016, with a 16% increase. There's over $300 billion. But one of the things that investment in Canada not only gives you a stable base within Canada, so we're talking about the bilateral benefits, but in fact, we have trade agreements. We have 14 free trade agreements now, and the total GDP of the countries that we have free trade agreements with, $1 trillion. So you're accessing the Pacific, the Americas, of course, the US. And so it's a platform. And things that I think we should be looking at with our SMEs and with our larger companies is growing them together. So in partnership, however that's structured. Because while the area that CETA itself covers is also very large, we're talking about 490 million people. It can be the incubator as well, especially for our SMEs, to learn how to go global and reach the entire global market. Because of course, I'm sure Dominic would agree. SMEs are part of those larger global chains already. But they can leverage our agreement with Europe to be competitive with anybody, whether India, United States. So that's an argument, I think, for our SMEs to take the plunge a little bit. Been going into Europe more than the other way around, but partnerships are structured in a way that investment is awfully blended, and there's many other factors into it. But the decision to think about Europe should also be influenced by the fact that there's a continent here with top level capacity, intellectual capacity, human capital, financial capital, and if you want to go to the best, go to Europe. And once you've achieved that, you can take on the world. And that's an argument that's a little bit more than just go to Europe and trade with Europe. It's something that we need to, I think, encourage our companies, and especially with COVID, and as people move to e-commerce, communication, our e-commerce in the last 6 months, from 5 to 10% of commerce is now e-commerce in Canada. Virtual platforms, you realize, you know what, I can do a lot virtually. I don't necessarily have to make that transatlantic flight, because now people are accustomed to working in this new in this new venue. So I think Canada, it becomes a platform for the world. And I think EU is a platform for Canadian companies for the world as well. We also, I should mention, have a new 2 years old, I guess, organization. I think you'll be hearing about Invest in Canada, which is talking about some of the particular reasons to come and invest in Canada. For example, our super clusters, of which we have 5: protein, advanced manufacturing, ocean. So we're bringing together the best and the brightest, both in Canada and from around the world, as an incentive for European investors to come in and access that top drawer.
So Canada has really opened its doors, increasing mobility again also.
Exactly. We very much encourage mobility. COVID is a little bit complicated, of course, but we are very much open to the world.
Good, and we're certainly happy to welcome you. So it's I think it's been I think everyone, and it's 3 years is good because there was so much fear about CETA in Europe, where some people were concerned about different standards, and a lot of people fear the unknown. So now we can it's actually a good time, and this is why the summit is actually a good time to discuss CETA, because 3 years on we can see all of the benefits, and everyone, if they put their minds to it and have the knowledge, they can grow from it, and it's not taking anything from anyone. It's actually growing together, and I do believe that I won't be quoting anyone, but together we are indeed stronger. And I think this relationship between Canada and Europe is definitely beneficial, and will keep benefiting a lot of people. So I'm glad to see that also the small businesses indeed will benefit. I will move on to another question. So Europe's well, actually, we do export a lot in Europe. So Europe's exports to Canada has doubled since 2017. So do you think it's only due to CETA, or is it also just the trends and also with the evolving world? So how do you explain this good performance and the concrete returns for the European states? So Dominic, I will direct this question to you, if you don't mind.
Right, no problem. And actually, just also to build on what Chris has said, complement that from Canada also as a place for investment, because I think especially in the crisis, what characterizes a good place of investment, especially in these turbulent times, is legal security, predictability, issues of transparency, an overall business-friendly environment. And Canada already has a long track record in exactly those quality, and that's why it's very interesting for EU investors and businesses. And exactly has created more certainty and predictability and transparency and facilitated these investments. When we talk about also mobility, intra-corporate transferees, etc. This is all just increased the appeal of Canada. And as well, and because I mentioned that Canada is a very open economy, has a large network of trade agreements, including, which is of course very interesting for European business, the newly ratified USMCA, or as he would say, CUSMA, and that is of course very interesting because Canada then it's kind of bridgehead to the North American market as well for European companies. And now we have agreements with 2 out of 3 of the CUSMA parties, and let's see what happens with the third one as we move along. But I think it is clear that all this has had a very positive impact on Europe and European investments. In fact, also if you look at the relative importance of European investments in Canada has also increased steadily over the past years. And I think on both sides, this has contributed more to the diversification strategy that also Canada is seeking, and also which is one of the issues of importance here in Europe. And in terms of the benefits are really across the member states. I mean, We had mentioned the tariffs that came down. 98% of them were removed, and there are different elements there in different categories. And as Chris mentioned, those where the tariff peaks were already fairly high, those where we see the biggest gains. If you're talking clothing duties from 16 to 0, machinery, electrical equipment, medical devices, all these things where we had tariffs in Canada, they all went down, and that has been very, very beneficial across member states, including here the member state where we're in, Belgium. But also, I think important, let's say, new opportunities in the public procurement market. I think this is unprecedented in terms of the position of European companies on the Canadian procurement market, and that is a huge sum. I think about 32 billion per year that are open now on a non-discriminatory basis to European companies. I think that is hugely important, and I think one of the things we also found, we did a report last year together with the Committee of the Region, where we analyzed a bit the trade implementation, also CETA, and one of the things there is that we need to really make sure also all these tenders and opportunities in public procurement are transparent and open, so that we can really make use of them.
Yeah.
So that this openness on paper translates ever more into openness in practice.
Yeah.
But there are many other issues on cutting red tape and saving businesses time and money when they go to Canada. So CETA really as a whole has given many benefits and predictability and to European companies and investors.
Well, it certainly has given a great framework, and the results are showing. And we can, by reducing costs, it's increased all of those investments, and it's provided a framework for it. But in terms of mobility, how are things progressing to make sure that that you get actually, because you mentioned, Chris, earlier that Canada is very much open to bringing in experts and the right people, but are diplomas pretty easy now to get recognized? How is there a framework being put in place for all of that to facilitate the mobility, which obviously at the moment is a bit not the case, but I trust, well, I'm hopeful, I'll touch wood, that 2021 we can start moving around a bit more. But how about recognizing those expertise? Because there's so many different people who are qualified across Europe and around the world, but to get those people over, does CETA provide that?
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks, Melina. There's two chapters that deal with mobility. One is for short-term business visitors, and that one, of course, everything is upset by normal. We can facilitate short-term stays in Canada for business purposes. The one you're referring to is about recognition of professional qualifications, and we are making some headway on that.
Yeah.
It's a bit slower than perhaps some anticipated. We have the first agreement between European and Canadian architects, and so that's moving forward.
Okay.
We're looking forward to getting other associations together. It can be that kind of recognition and allowing people easier movement and credentials. I should say as well, though, there is a larger issue too about getting to know. And one of the things that we have to face is that for older generations familiar from the history of the 20th century, families came from there. There was the wars, I should say. The new generations in Canada, Canada is a very diverse country. Fewer and fewer people have European origins. We don't get the students doing the grand tour of Europe anymore. I did one when I was a student, that kind of thing. Universities in Canada noticed that students take these. So we've got a bit of a job to do, and is to show a modern view of Europe, and I guess vice versa. We are very interested in things like Horizons Europe and linkages between our universities. We've had a number of discussions with the university around that. And those kind of connections they are going to facilitate the commercial links, especially if we look at some of the emerging sectors that where we both have a lot of capacity. So I'm thinking artificial intelligence, where we work closely with Europe. We just had some discussions a couple of weeks ago on that, on the ethics you mentioned. Applications. We had a very successful quantum workshop, so virtually needless to say. But it's all part of our mutual image, so that it's there's a lot of history there, but really more important now is developing the picture of the future. And so that's going to facilitate linkages, because if businesses know, the Canadians are number 3 in the world for AI startups. The Canadians have a big expertise in quantum. Huge airspace, we know that. But when we talk about some of the things, for example, that were in the union speech, let's talk about batteries as powering the new green future. Well, in Canada, we have most of the minerals to make batteries. We have 14 of the 19 solar panels. So if you're looking at supply chains and diversity of source, that's part of the future that we have to construct. And then the same on the Canadian side. People need to know about where research is in Europe and why they should be connected to Horizons, which we agreed we worked together on in last year's EU-Canada Summit between the then President and the Prime Minister. That's important to underpin a lot of what economic and trade relationship is going to look like. And that will be facilitated by people movement, whether it's students and researchers, business people, or professionals going to practice their professions in the European Union.
I think it's a very fair point you make, actually, because we can put a framework in place like CETA, but if we don't know one another and we have assumptions about each other, it will make it difficult. And it's true that Europe has this, can be this sort of old continent, but I don't think we're taking anything for granted anymore, and not assuming that we are self-sufficient. And I think CETA was definitely a right step in the right direction. But it will be, it's a very interesting point, actually. Making sure that the younger generation know that they can travel and that we can get to know each other, and then it makes it easier as well in terms of investment. So hopefully, well, here come next year, they'll be able to travel, but then we can have those summits like today and get to know each other and learn a bit more about each other's culture. I was lucky enough to study a couple of years in Canada, so it's a country I love, and I've had the pleasure of working with as well. So, Dominic, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I can fully subscribe to the points Chris made. The importance of collaborating on research together, on pooling resources, on facilitating the transfer of knowledge. This is critical. I think when we combine our knowledge, we're better to addressing global challenges as climate change and the new artificial intelligence and new technologies that are coming up. Raw materials is a great point, and there's a lot of activity as we speak in Europe, right, on that, and in terms of sourcing supply. But I would make one point that not only is important between our universities, but it's also very important between our businesses.
Yeah.
And we have also, as Eurochambres, a lot of experience, which initially started as an EU-only program, for the EU market, and there was Erasmus for young entrepreneurs. So that you have a young entrepreneur that comes and stays with a more experienced entrepreneur in a different country for a certain period of time in terms of to learn from each other. And I think there's a pilot phase that has expanded this to beyond the EU, to the US and Israel and others. And now I think this is very, very interesting to explore with Canada as well, because I think these linkages and knowledge transfer needs to happen not only on the university scientists, researchers, but I believe also critically among the business people as well.
Oh, that's a very good point. So Well, I hope that some of the people listening in are also sort of taking in all of this information, and will want to learn as well from other people. And I think it's always healthy to learn from other cultures, because we're so used to doing business in a certain way, because this is what we've been taught, that actually going and practicing with other professionals actually helps us have a different perspective. So, and actually this now leads us to, we have questions from the audience. So you will have to be patient with me whilst I read them. So it's a question from Roy. Good afternoon. We are, Chris and Dominic, please jump in. But so the question is from Roy. We are a Dutch company trading with Canada and finalizing opening a warehouse in the Quebec area. Do you have any suggestions on how to keep up with CIMA surtax regulations, which seems to run alongside the CETA agreement? Actually, Chris, you may be able to answer this directly.
So
is the experience of a Dutch company
with the regulations?
Okay, that's fine. Dominic, maybe you are?
What? Oh, I think I'm back on the precise nature of the question, but I think what is very important, and it goes to the point that we need to also for CETA, and a lot of work has been done. So what I can point to, because I'm not sure I got fully the question, but what I can point to is a lot of the guides that have been made available by both governments in terms of really guiding the companies through the different elements in CETA, whether it's on rule of origin, whether it's on services, whether it's on procurement, etc. So these are all online. This is critical information, because it's really about translating the words in the agreement into practice and what it means for the companies. So I can really encourage these.
Well, what I might do is that know that following the business summit, there will be more information online. But with, I mean, obviously with any agreement, with time we actually learn how to improve it on different areas. And are there any, because there are questions which are then answered and we have the general information, but when there are specific questions like that from businesses, can they address those questions to a specific organization somewhere? Because I think that's, because that's the thing, is this is like a small business setting up in Canada, and they're not too sure how to best navigate between the agreements and the local rules and regulations and taxes. So is there like a general, is there someone or an email or website that could submit their specific questions to help clarify and help develop their business?
Yes, I mentioned before, we have an organization. We have a new organization called Invest in Canada. And certainly our mission here in Brussels can help Roy and his company navigate all of that. If it's, I don't, Quebec area, certainly the province of Quebec and the cities, Montreal and Quebec, would probably. So, but we'd be happy to give him the specific information that he really needs.
Brilliant. So Invest in Canada will definitely be the point of call for Europeans investing in Canada.
Melina, if I just compliment on that, of course, there's also...
Yes, but through our missions, because Invest in Canada is worth.
Just one point on that as well. Of course, there are also the chambers that can help in the Netherlands, Roy and his company, to further help him on the precise details of his request. There are also, of course, the bilateral chambers in Canada, the EEN contact points that are helpful in that regard, and of course, in a close collaboration with with the government entities, as Chris has mentioned, on the Canadian side, but also on the EU side, and from the member states, which stand ready to help companies like the one Roy has.
Yeah, no, and that's good, because I mean, it's there's always the theory and then there's the practice, and it's true that the larger firms do have the legal teams to help them navigate all of this, but it's good to know that there are, you know, people that can be reached, and and organizations like Invest in Canada, which will definitely be a key partner in getting and helping this mobility, really, from one country to another, and developing all of those different businesses. I'm just very briefly checking if there are any other questions from the audience, and if not, I will go back to my own questions. But just 1 second. No, I think we're good. Yes. And actually, I see that Roy has received as well a direct answer. So I'm glad to see that the chat is very is alive and is helping people get answers. So we still have time for 1 or 2 questions. And yes, so not every single European country has signed a CETA, the CETA agreement. And actually, Cyprus was the first state to actually reject it. And has this had an impact, or has it made it just, you know, just find more or better sort of arguments to get people and countries to sign the agreement? I'll let you speak.
Chris, I think, okay. I think, yeah. First of all, ratification, just to be clear, ratification is related primarily to the investment is being implemented for 3 years. We've talked about trade and the benefits with that. So it's really relating to the investment chapter. That's why member state competency has to be obtained, or member state ratification rather has to be obtained. It's a member state competency. So right now we have about 14 of the member states, and it is proceeding at the pace that it's proceeding at. It obviously relates to democratic debate in a number of countries. And it is, we respect that, of course, as we do the EU's overall democratic process. And we know that lots of local issues come into it, and that affects the debate to some extent. We naturally try our missions from the Canadian side, factual information about what CETA is and what it isn't, including the benefits, especially that it's created. So that sometimes people have misunderstood the agreement, associated with other things in the world, which it is not. So there's a fact checking that we do to a point, but I think we recognize that which ratification occurs, it has to fit within the democratic parameters of each country, each member state, and of the EU as a whole. Meanwhile, more jobs are benefiting from CETA every day. More people are benefiting overall as consumers. And reasonably pleased at the progress. Would be nice if everyone had ratified, but it's going to take some time. And you know, we appreciate the support that we get from member state governments, who of course have agreed to CETA, as well as the Commission. I think overall our position is let's respect the process and let's move it forward, but at the pace that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I think when people turn down opportunities, it's often out of fear and the unknown. And the advantage is now there is a history of 3 years, and 3 years may appear young, but it actually shows. And Belgium, actually, there was one part of Belgium which was quite against it, and now they can see all the benefits from it. So I think if the countries which are more reluctant look at what's going on and really look at, you know, well, facts and figures, as you've, you know, explained them earlier, I think it should help progress sort of everyone signing this agreement, because I think it's not going to lower standards, quite the opposite. It's really going to help exchange ideas, increase the quality, and not go and sort of, it's not going to dilute anything. It's quite the opposite. I think quality will definitely increase, and we can all learn from experience. And I think some countries can really see that. Go for it.
Yeah. If I could just add one thing, Eline, if I may. You know, CETA was considered the political context in mind, and we understand that people have concerns, environment, gender, that address that. There are mechanisms in CETA to about that. We have a civil society forum, for example. We have chapters on trade and sustainable development and processes. So it's designed to concern seen in before, and also in some ways that have become more important today, the environment or climate. And it has processes to help reassure people and make adjustments as necessary, so that people can understand why this is good for them and why it doesn't undermine standards, or in fact it improves the quality of life.
Yeah,
absolutely. And if I might come in on one of the things, I think it's critically important on that to really provide a factual debate and have all the different actors collaborating. So we as a business community, of course, also doing a lot in terms of providing that information, in terms of engaging at local and regional level as well on in that debate, in order to provide all the facts and bring all the facts to the table. I mean, these things, the full ratification just also takes its time. If we look at, for instance, the EU South Korea FTA, I think we had about 4 years by the time it was provisionally applied. So I think on this as well, it's very important. The Commission has put out a great tool, the CETA Comes to Your Town, where you can also see the different exporters located in the different member states, and also provides very good information on the benefits to the concrete member states. And you also see in Cyprus, for instance, that as every member state, they tend to benefit as well from CETA. It's Cyprus is the 4th biggest trade partner inside the EU in services.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things already there. So I think it's really about a coherent effort by the business community, by the government, including our cooperation with our Canadian friend, to provide all the facts needed in that democratic debate that needs to happen in the member states. But yeah, that takes its time. But I think with the facts, everybody's better served.
Definitely. And facts are always better after a few years experience, which is why it's good that we're talking about it now, because we can look back and have those facts. And I think it's also healthy that, you know, that everyone is willing to learn from it and adapt if need be, and improve, you know, certain things, and correct if need be. But at least, you know, there's this real great effort to really improve the trade and mobility between both Canada and Europe. So that's really good. And this brings us to the end of this panel. But I just really wanted to thank you, the both of you. I'm sorry we had some small technical issues, but I don't think it lowered the quality of this panel, quite the opposite. I think we've had some very interesting insights, and I think people know to go to invest in Canada and in Europe, and will not be scared of moving and trading and benefiting from each other's experiences. So again, a huge thank you to the two of you. Thank you for the audience for being there and taking the time to listen in very busy times, and wishing everyone a very good rest of the summit then. I will now leave you, but thank you again both for your time and for taking the time to clarify quite a few points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melina.
Thanks, Melina. Take care.
Hi, Johannes. It's good to see you. I'm wondering if we're live, but I don't think so yet. Hello.
Hello, good morning. Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon. Hi, Eline.
Hi. Hello, everyone. So we are live now. Good afternoon or good morning. I think we're working with two audiences at this time of the day.
Hello, good morning.
So, oh, hello. Good to see you again. Okay, I'm being told. So we are ready to get started. So hello, everyone joining the EU-Canada Business Summit 2020 and this conversation for the next hour. My name is Eline Chivot. I'm a policy analyst at the Center for Data Innovation, a think tank based in Brussels and DC, for which I cover EU tech policy. So to the audience online, first of all, if I can ask our distinguished panelists to mute themselves for now, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And to the audience online, thank you for joining. Feel free to engage on the social media using the handle @CE-Canada-Europe, CE-Canada-Europe. And as during this talk will allow sometimes for Q&As with you and our discussants, do write your questions in the Q&A section of this platform. Do not be shy. And I'm sure it will be a very interesting conversation because it's a topic that is very close to my work and heart. We will talk about artificial intelligence. So I'll have the pleasure to moderate this panel for the next hour. To set the scene first, a bit of food for thought before I introduce our speakers today. AI is emerging as one of the most strategic technologies of the century, transforming industries around the world and offering tremendous and countless benefits and efficiency for society and the economy. In healthcare, with the discovery of new treatments, in financial services with fraud detection. We talked about energy and the environment earlier today. Well, AI can help in reducing CO2 emissions and decreasing energy efficiency. Just more specifically, a major challenge in the spread of renewable energies is their unpredictability. And because supply and demand don't always match in time, AI can help in distributing electricity differently depending on the weather. It's just a fun fact I've read earlier this week. So many countries and companies understand the potential of the technology of AI and the innovation advantage it represents. So they're racing to develop AI and or to develop rules for AI. Businesses in Europe and Canada are in the forefront of some of the latest advancements in this field. Canada has gained worldwide reputation for its AI hubs in Montreal and Toronto, and universities in Europe are home to the greatest concentration of AI researchers in the world. To fully realize this potential, both do need an influx of resources and talent and supportive policies. So we're going to ask ourselves today, in which sectors of the economy does most of AI's potential lie? And how do Canada and the EU position themselves as leaders in AI? What are the tensions in terms of national interests? And how can policies and partnerships support the development, the use, the adoption of AI to drive efficiency, reduce costs, and foster innovation? And finally, is there a trade-off between safeguarding our common values and principles and developing competitive and accurate AI systems? With us to discuss all this, hopefully as much as we can, let's welcome our three distinguished speakers. Yves Lostanlen, I should have been first before. General Manager, Europe, Middle East, and Africa at ElementAI. You're joining us from Paris in France, if I'm correct.
That's correct. Very happy to be here. Hello.
Great to welcome you. And then we have Johannes, Nitschke, Director, EU Government Affairs at Siemens, and you are joining us from Brussels. And finally, last but not least, Gohar, Sargsyan, Director, EU and Innovation at CGI, and you're joining us from Amsterdam today. Thank you all. Let me dive into the conversation, starting with you, Yves. So we talk about an AI race. But beyond the hype, why does AI matter as a technology, strategically, geopolitically? What is the current potential, and what is it? How is it likely to develop in the near future?
Yeah, thank you. So absolutely, we can see this race on many dimensions concerning artificial intelligence, and definitely there are a lot of things at stake for the different countries and regions in the world. And what we can see, if we want to talk about the geopolitical sphere, is that you have a spectrum of different approaches and models, spanning from the state-controlled approach, for example, in Asia, in China, for example, to a more liberal, economic, laissez-faire type of approach, totally led by the GAFAM today, the tech giants that we can find in the US. And we have Canada, we have a few other countries, including EU, some countries in EU that are somewhere in the middle. And the balance definitely must be struck. So this balance could come from different types of initiatives. We could talk, obviously, about the global partnership on artificial intelligence, where Canada and France initially spearheaded those initiatives, and now they've gathered a team of 15 countries that are like-minded, if we can say that, who want to adhere to the OECD principles and work towards the responsible commercialization of AI. And I think that when we're talking about AI, that's not only the technology, it's not only the national strategies and initiatives. So that's more, how do we put AI in the business, in operations? How do we generate adoption? How to generate trust? And how do we generate explicability and explainability? That's what is, I think, at stake here. And that's where typically, if we want to set the context, the technologists that we also call the makers in Brussels, and the shapers, the regulators, can work together along with the various national initiatives.
Thank you very much. It's a very good way to kick off the conversation. Maybe turning to you, Gohar, you probably have a reaction to this first comment, and perhaps can you tell us which sectors of the economy do you see as, particularly promising, where you see AI is really making strides, and maybe where, on the other hand, companies seem more reluctant or less able to adopt AI?
It's actually a very good question, because I think the way we have to look, it's not about one sector or one industry, because artificial intelligence is almost taking over in all areas, especially the services industries, and also data-driven economy. It will be impacted the most. So any area, any industry, any vertical which is really data-driven and also service-minded, they are all going to be impacted seriously. That's the way I see the future, especially artificial intelligence. What is artificial intelligence? It's never new, of course. It's the implications, application areas, and possibilities are newly perceived as potential and as more serious to come. So that is why it is seen as something new. However, it has been there forever. Machine learning, deep learning, statistical analytics combined, it has been there. That was the base of artificial intelligence indeed. So to say the most disruptive areas, the industries and sectors, it would be, of course, healthcare, transportation, banking, financial services, insurances, to name a few. However, those, I would say, the first one, and also due to digitalization, indeed, that is why the trend is bigger, and so there is the idea, like when a human intelligence meets the artificial intelligence, the business as usual is already over. So that is the disruption which will come to most of the industries. And the question you had with regards to which sector and industry will be more reluctant to adopt, I would say the ones which are more disrupted, they will also be slightly reluctant to immediately adopt it, because it's associated with huge amount of costs. It's associated with mindset shift, and it is associated with end of business as usual. So that's the way my input to this question would be.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Our brains don't like change. So if it's no longer business as usual, that can be a disruption that leads to reluctance to adopt. Thank you for this comment, Gohar. I'm turning to Johannes on behalf of Siemens. I know that you're active in very different sectors, but I know in the healthcare sector, this is what Gohar mentioned. It's one of the most promising sectors for AI. Could you tell us a little bit about the types of applications and promises that AI represent for industry today, specifically in Europe, perhaps?
Sure, happy to do so. I mean, thank you for inviting us, for inviting Siemens and giving us the opportunity here. I think it's a particularly interesting setting with this connection between Canada and the EU, of course. For Siemens, I mean, we are basically a globally operating company with a strong footprint also in Canada, of course, in North America in general, where, for example, our software business is based. And I think here, what's in a lot of the discussion and a lot of the perceptions related to AI are still linked to the B2C, to the business to consumer sector. And obviously at Siemens, we want to focus more on the B2B, on the business to business sector, because there's actually even much more potential, as I think some of the, I think both other speakers have already alluded to, because if we only focus at search engine optimization, or we focus at speech recognition, or we focus at how to optimize likes for influencers on a social media platform, that's all good and well. But if we really want to make progress also for humankind, tackling something, I mean, we know what the real world problems are, right? We have the Sustainable Development Goals, and in order to address those with AI technology, we need to look at the B2B applications. So Siemens being active in many verticals. I mean, there's, on the one hand, there's the digitalization and automation of factories. And for that, artificial intelligence plays a very important role. I mean, we can be so much more efficient. And the Corona crisis was I mean, this is a very good showcase for what is possible now. We have many clients, for example, in the food and beverage industry. And thanks to digitized production processes and digital twins that use also AI and algorithms, they were possible to be much more flexible on their production, which was essential during the Corona crisis, for example. Other examples that you're alluding to, yes, healthcare is very big. I mean, our Siemens Healthineers have many examples in that field. For example, when it comes to detection of diseases with scanning, there's great opportunities with the prediction of diseases. There we have optimization of train setting interlocutors, which will save a lot of energy. We have in smart cities and smart buildings many opportunities. Then also in the energy field, for example, our gas and wind turbines, we use also AI algorithms to optimize the settings and lower the emissions output of those big turbines, just to name a few examples.
Yeah, and so indeed, you mentioned the COVID-19 crisis and how, even though, Gohar, you said some very disrupted industries may be slower or more reluctant to adopt AI, the COVID-19 really drove sometimes quicker digitalization or adoption of the technology by many industries. Turning back to you, Yves, sorry, is there an echo? Is there a little echo? I was wondering if you could tell us if AI has played this role to the expectations we could have had during the pandemic, because some researchers have been, and communities and organizations have been quick to apply their AI know-how to fight the pandemic. But some say we need some things to change if we want AI to be more useful next time, because we've reached some limits, like the low adoption rate for contact tracing applications, the lack of data for research, of common standards for data sharing. So to what extent has AI proven itself during the
Absolutely. That's. I don't think that COVID has actually changed a lot in this adoption, but it has probably raised a lot of awareness around the possibilities that can be done, and has actually helped on the setting the scene, setting the stage for AI to be adopted. And maybe there is a little echo. Yeah, I don't know, Gohar, maybe if I don't want to pinpoint, but I don't know if you're on mute or not. No figure pointing here. Thank you. I think that's better. Sorry about that.
No problem.
As you've mentioned, I think that's it's typical of what we can see with the applications you've mentioned. And that's about adoption. If you take the Stop COVID-19 application, that's the name in France for that, I think that it has been adopted by less than 5% of the population. It really shows that it's not necessarily AI per se. That's more sharing the data. What is done with my data? Where is my privacy around this data? And that's more a B2C approach here. But that's totally translatable, totally transportable to the B2B as well. Because especially when you are in a regulated or an industry or heavily certificated industry, you don't want, I would say, to mess around with the data of your customers. And when you mention which industries have adopted AI the most, well, no doubt the high tech, the automotive, the telecommunication have adopted very quickly. Many reasons for that. First, they were already very advanced in the digitalization. Second, they were very engineering-driven type of industries. We could say about the same for other sectors like the energy sector, for example. For the laggers, you would have the professional services, the infrastructure. You would also have maybe the pharma world when it comes to manufacturing. And here, that's not maybe a question of lack of digitalization, although we could maybe argue. That's also the regulation around it. Will I be still compliant with the regulation agencies if I'm deploying AI? Maybe not, because what is AI? AI, let's remind us that it's machine learning as well, which means that the software learns and will have different results over time, and usually with more data that are ingested, more acuity that will come from the software, from experience, and also obviously by interacting with the humans and the operators when using this algorithm. Which means that for a regulator, that's extremely difficult to certify a software that would have a different answer in a few months or in a few years than when it was actually certified. And that's, again, a fantastic segue to this discussion around regulation and technologies who needs to work together in order to actually be able to fine-tune the policies, the regulations, in iterations and not the one after the other, because the high pace of those digital approaches impose us to work together and imposes us to work also with the citizens, with the users. So coming back to this COVID, on the perception of the users, not much has changed. But you can see an industry like retail that has also been mentioned by Johannes in the food and beverage somehow. If we want to go down to the retail or up to the retail, that's actually where you see the highest growth. That's where you see a tremendous adoption of new digital strategies, new data governance around that. And the stress, the disruption was so high during COVID that then it kind of unlocked the minds in sharing some of the data that could actually be, at arm's length of the privacy data from the consumers, but very close to the supply chain. So it has changed a lot, and that's certainly through an acceleration at high speed of the digitalization process of the data governance, of an understanding that sharing some data could have some value, that actually it helps AI to be there. But AI as well had a mitigated impact, on some, in hospitals, for example. You had a couple of initiatives that helped on the scheduling or, rearranging some of the rooms, etc. These were more the exceptions than really a full adoption. But again, it shows a couple of very encouraging initiatives to that end. So my point is that it's very mitigated. Mm-hmm. Yes, some progresses, but probably not on par with our expectations.
Yeah, I've read somewhere that I think it was a commission survey that showed that only 42% of European companies have adopted AI so far, compared to 85% in China. What is the situation in Canada, if you have an element to compare?
So, maybe that's... I'm starting at least. Please jump in, Johannes and Gohar. In Canada, I think that it comes back maybe, or it touched upon the different strategies, national strategies that have helped somehow the adoption of AI. In Canada, we are very lucky to have two big hubs, and probably more, but I want to name obviously Montreal and Toronto. So ElementAI was born in Montreal. The headquarters is still in Montreal, where actually our friends from CGI also have their headquarters. And in Toronto, we also had offices where, indeed, in the greater Toronto area, Siemens is also very present. And we were lucky to have a couple of different initiatives in the academia, from the government, from the provinces, who actually totally act as catalysts of those AI clusters to happen. So I think that those first round of national strategies, and you could find the same in France and elsewhere, that was fantastic for the talent, that was fantastic for the R&D investments, that was fantastic to bring awareness and somehow to create, the right mechanisms for the different stakeholders to talk to each other. But obviously that's not enough. So adoption is great, more on the pilot phase than a real adoption. Perception in the countries are good, but maybe, and we know, we need a second phase of those national strategies that will actually go from R&D to ROI, return on investment, and that's actually the stage where we are. That's where OECD, that's where the global partnership on AI are really investing a lot of time. Commercialization of AI. So really helping the businesses to adopt AI and to convert that in their operations to for the various metrics that it can enhance. Gohar, I don't know if through CGI you have some ideas.
If I can unmute myself for a second. I majorly thanks for your input for the if I can provide my input as well. In fact, European Commission, I'm sure most of you are aware that globally bringing all the European countries together also has a serious investment with regard to artificial intelligence, R&D. I think artificial intelligence at this stage is still mainly at the innovation level. Adoption is still to come. Of course, there are certain elements, as you gave a couple of interesting examples, yes. However, adoption is still to come. So if I look also this large Horizon 2020 program, which is ending this year, as you know, there was, for every year, the investment on AI was increased by 70%, coming to 1.5 billion euros. However, in your Horizon Europe program, there will be 7 billion euro investment. You see that huge difference, of course. And individual countries, of course, do also a lot. For example, from my role also, I'm very much engaged in the partnerships. I've been also in a great partnership in Canada with universities like Concordia University or University of Montreal, Techno Montreal, several, of course, commercial organizations. The idea at this stage is still not at the adoption, my understanding still. So therefore, I totally agree that R&D boost, which will leverage, which will result to real potential market implications, that is the future, that is a near future. However, we don't have much time also on the other hand, because the technology goes so fast, especially artificial intelligence is so fast. So we need to be digitalization, catch up with the digitalization in order to make sure that we can make maximum benefits from AI. And of course, we will have certain, I see that you are also, you prepared some discussion about regulation and also ethical and responsible AI. So that is why I basically will not provide more details here. However, that is extremely critical as well to consider. And I totally agree that it's an overall ecosystem around it. It's about regulation, it's about ethics, even if it is COVID-created conditions that we immediately went digital, but everything is not considered yet because there are so many tools to manipulate which needs to be regulated about privacy, about security, about all kinds of other ethical aspects. So that is why I think partnerships going together and finding common constructive solutions for the upcoming future is one of the solutions towards the ethical and responsible AI.
Thank you, Gohar. I know there's been a lot discussed, Johannes, but just to use some of what I've heard, maybe send this back to you so that you can react. You know, how do you see, you know, there are some building blocks for AI. You need talent, you need data, you need hardware, you need sufficient investment, you need good tech standards, you need public trust, you need a strong research ecosystem. And, you know, those countries, including Canada in 2017 and the EU and its member states have built roadmaps, have built AI strategies, national strategies. How have these plans been helpful to organizations like Siemens when they're, you know, developing the technologies? And what should companies be aware of when it comes to that level of governance and the impact for them? Mute. Okay, you're unmuted.
All right. Yeah. Now, yes, I'd like to pick up also a point that Yves mentioned at the beginning, that there is this plethora of different initiatives. And what I found personally most shocking was that in Europe, we had about 20 different national strategies, and it took quite a while for the EU also to come up with one. And if sometimes, I mean, it's great that all governments want to engage, but it can be confusing, and then you cannot focus on all of them because, I mean, I'm in our government affairs team in Siemens, and even for a big company, we do not have, you know, dedicated government affairs people who would follow AI policy in each country. So we have to bundle a bit and be and be flexible there. I think, I mean, definitely the EU approach is very helpful. We have contributed to the EU consultation on AI, also to the EU consultation on the data and cloud strategy that came at the same time. And I think Yves or Gohar mentioned it earlier that the trust issue is not so much linked to, or is mostly linked really to data and the trust in data. And it's really, I mean, the problem or the misconception often comes more from this experience from, you know, the scandals that we've seen with, especially with the social networks and data leaks and so on. That's really unhelpful here, and that probably hinders in certain ways the uptake when it comes also to the useful use of such COVID warning applications and so on. I think you're right to point out those building blocks. I mean, I think talent is really one, and education, which is extremely important. But also, maybe I'd like to pick up on the trust point, because I mean, you have to see it in a holistic way. I mean, there's data and there's the trust, public trust, but also for us, it's also trust from our customers, which are often SMEs in, all over the world, but especially also in, let's say, in Germany. And for them to embrace new technologies and AI-based solution, it's something that they will only do if we can convince them that we are a trusted partner and can create some kind of environment of trust. And what we've done 2.5 years ago at the Munich Security Conference, together with some very strong partners, we launched a Charter of Trust, which is mainly focusing on cybersecurity. We had many companies all across from Europe and also from North America. By now, over the years, we've taken these 10 principles that were launched back then and developed each one to put really some meat to the bone, to not have just a high-level political communication, but also have some actual things. Like we worked on supply chain cybersecurity and introduced, all of the companies introduced clear cybersecurity requirements into their terms and conditions with all the service providers. So to really take some action there. And this is something we feel is very much needed for also for the uptake of AI applications. And we're extremely happy and proud that now since August this year, we also have a Canadian partner. So we have the Canadian Cybersecurity Center, which is now an associated partner to the Charter of Trust. So that's one way where we can also share the best practice that we've had in Europe with the Canadian partners. I think on the research point that you mentioned, and I'll finish on this one, with the research point that you mentioned, is probably something where the EU and Europe can learn a lot from Canada, because we've seen as a very positive example these super clusters for AI that we have in Canada, and I think that would be something that would be extremely helpful to also have that in Europe when it comes to because finally there is now a willingness to invest a lot of money also in AI and in the research, but I think from the investment to the uptake, there's a lot of steps, and something like this supercluster structure would help a lot. So I think there's also a lot to learn both ways.
Yeah, and I think it's essential these days with the recession to think of how we can pool resources with partners and think about it as a global approach. Interestingly, so you mentioned some of those best practices and industry-led initiatives and standards that can ensure responsible use and development of technologies, or in that case, that was cybersecurity infrastructure. Yves, you mentioned, that there are some sort of three approaches: the state-controlled by China, the liberal approach, more hands-off by maybe the US, the GAFAM, as you put it, from the industry perspective, and European Union and Canada would be in the middle. But there's still a sense that the third way, EU and Canada, would still aim to regulate, to write the rule book for AI. Aren't industry-led standards enough? Do we really need to go further and legislate, especially when you think of how critical it is to go fast with a technology that evolves fast, but the law that catches up, and lags behind? What would you respond to that?
Well, I think that if we leave to the market and to standardization bodies to bring some principles that will actually, on a voluntary basis, make the industry, go in the right way, we do not think that will be sufficient. And a good example could be about the recent procurements in the public sector that appeared, where you had some bidders that answered to the problem, indeed, created, good solutions on paper that will certainly tackle the problem, and most of them have actually omitted the transparency and the explainability of the realizations they will do, and it's not their fault. But that's not the first natural thing that you will deploy. That's not the first natural thing that you will bring in the design. And that's where we do think that the responsible AI that Gohar was mentioning before comes into play. We need to bring some explainability, some transparency, and it costs. If you're building a solution with that inherently at the inception of the project, it costs more. And you can't expect the market to bring that, on a voluntary basis. You need actually to have some sort of, legal instrument or some forcing functions in order for the basic requirement to have that transparency and explainability embedded within your product. Now, could argue, but who will decide? And what is transparency? What is explainability? That's where we are really almost at the state of the art of the understanding around that. So as you know, ElementAI has a strong research DNA on the technology, but also a lot on those aspects about trustworthiness, about explainability, about finding the right techniques to not only explain the models, but explain the usage of the models. And we apply that to the financial services, but also to manufacturing, etc. So we do think that creating the tools to better understand and maybe to better procure those kind of projects is important. And it's not a single company activity. That's actually where the standardization bodies could also be useful together with the technologists and the regulators. Maybe I'd like to mention as well that those solutions need to be deployed on infrastructure that are really top-notch. And Johannes mentioned that a little bit through the data and cloud initiatives in the EU. But you can take reports after reports, and a very good one is actually the Tortoise Media AI Index. I really encourage people to read this one because it's a kind of ranking of different countries where, again, on the talent part, on the research part, you have a few European countries, Germany, France, Ireland, UK, etc., who appear in a very good position. It's dominated by the US in all dimensions, then China second, and Canada also is in a very good place, except for all those countries, but the US and China on the infrastructure. That's not on par with the full massive deployment at scale of those AI solutions. So it's urgent for EU and for Canada to have those modern infrastructure to host those computation. That's really the cloud computing that we have in mind here. And it goes along with the protection of data and I would say sovereignty as much as we can on those aspects with like-minded people. So again, there are a few indeed paths in order to have this model. We do think that the in-between EU, Canada is a good one, together with the standardization bodies and the regulators, because we need to make it sure that the regulation is soft enough so that we can actually have a market that can find its forces, but that is strong enough so that we have a responsible AI and actually applications that fulfills the either ODD, the UN goals on sustainability and the human rights. So when we say the human rights, that's all the actions that are done by the fantastic body of Council of Europe today, very advanced on those fields. And ElementAI is a contributor on that aspect as well, because we can't dissociate a B2B application from the understanding of those technologies to serve the society and the people. And it's hard. That's why it's not fully adopted. That's why we are still at the early stages of this AI. We need collectively to understand better but we've made so many progresses that it's very encouraging, but we need to have even more key stakeholders at the table to create the society in which we all want to evolve.
Thank you. Maybe Gohar, you'd like to react on that. How does industry and the types of organizations you work with understand that part of the discussion? Do they feel it's easier to navigate as a landscape because it's being regulated? Policymakers are crafting rules. How what does that mean for them when they want to develop and experiment with the technology?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I will say two opinions. One is what I think it would be, and the second what I face based on the experience I had. From my role, I'm more on the innovation, let's say ahead thinkers, let's say futurists, and the ones who are strategically thinking and trying to make changes. But on the other hand, of course, there are organizations we are also communicating which are relatively traditional, because they are scared to change, or they prefer to keep their safe businesses. And I would say, first of all, okay, I like the way Yves mentioned about soft enough and strong enough type of regulations, which is about like something flexible, something in between. I just wanted to add one more thing, that AI, regulating AI is a very complex thing, in my opinion. It is not about one technology. Because what is AI? AI is itself complex. AI itself contains multiple elements and multiple stakeholders, and also technological elements besides the organization type. So therefore, I think it is very, very, very complex at this stage. Definitely, they have to do some steps, and there are front runners on the setting up the regulations, like European Union also make important steps. But saying what the organizations do, some of the organizations that I communicated with, they say, oh, this is nice, or we say like cool, interesting initiative. It is just some interesting demo we can do, but it is a long way to go in our practice. But some other type of organizations, they are really seriously investing because they know that this is coming in the next future. And what is the next future? If probably last year when we would talk, it would be forecasted in 10 years to change, to come. But these days, I would say probably 5 years. I don't know if you agree with me, but I would say in 5 years' time, AI can take over so many human functions. Just taking example of these telephones today, basically they are our second brains. We don't remember a lot of telephone numbers or a lot of information because it's already sorted in the phones. So having said this, I think the organizations are not all the organizations are open in going forward with, let's say, regulation, regulated, they are supportive. Let me correct myself. They are supporting, of course, they prefer to have it already framework in place so that they can operate, but they don't want to be the first ones to suggest changes. So that is why it is not so easy in the current environment to act in terms of adoption cycle. Adoption is a long way to come, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much for your comments. Johannes, your reactions on that, and also how do you know European and Canadian business activities are looking at the intentions to create laws on how they can use AI? What do they need? What are their questions, pain points?
I think a lot of I would agree with both Yves and Gohar. I think regulation is always a difficult point, because if you now, I mean, we when it comes to new technologies, we're looking you need some space to create and to invent and innovate and then to apply. If you start with very heavy regulation from the beginning, then I think there is a risk for that to happen in Europe. If you do that, then it's very likely Europe will lose out on the next steps of AI, because it will be a clear disadvantage. I think we've seen already in the B2C space that there's there are less European champions, I would say, than from other regions in the world, like North America and China. And when it comes to B2B, we definitely need to make sure that Europe is more competitive, because we are also already now so strong in this field. And I think it's probably quite similar for Canada. That's why I would also argue that we should always have a distinction when it comes to artificial intelligence. When you talk about regulation, that on the one hand you have regulation for the B2C sector, but that B2B is something very different. The same goes actually for data, because we feel if you have a let's say big internet company and you're are directly interacting with your users, then it's by default always a very unfair agreements and terms that you operate on. But when you have like, for example, Siemens providing a platform for industrial data and working with their customers, then we have contractual relationship with the customers, and it's more of a meeting between equals, especially if we have with big industrial customers. Then there's much more knowledge on what type of data you share, and there's also more knowledge on what is the value of that data. And I think that's why you need to have clear distinctions, and especially in the B2B field, we feel it shouldn't be regulation. I mean, we're all in favor of increasing trustworthy AI and uptake of ethical AI. That's very important, but we should act cautiously when it comes to regulation here, because simply we had an example. It was linked in a completely different dossier in the copyright directive. There was a strong risk of completely forbidding in Europe text and data mining for commercial purposes, and that would have been very problematic for small companies that were going to engage in and apply AI to their customers. And luckily that was prevented, but there's always a risk, that a risk of overregulation for business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to hear Yves' reaction on that, because I know ElementAI produces, as you mentioned, some sort of analysis of the metrics, with metrics of performance between I think Canada, the EU, the US, and also China. And we're seeing China is racing ahead. And while when we regulate, some are worried that we have blanket rules, basically what Johannes sort of referred to, that would impose additional costs, that it would be translating ethical principles into requirements that sometimes are not realistic. You mentioned explainability or transparency. Does that work for all AI systems? So wouldn't a better approach be to really go, and you mentioned the GPAI, indeed, to go together to create more global governance around this issue, and to be able to supersede a model that we disagree with, which would be the authoritarian model and use of AI? Well,
I mean, that's really one of the aims of either some initiatives of the OECD or indeed the GPAI. And the global partnership on AI, again, has two main hubs. One is in Montreal, the other one is in Paris. And the initiatives, again, are from the 15 different members. And our own CEO and co-founder, Jeff Garnier, is actually the chair of the utilization of AI in GPAI. So we are really at the heart of those discussions. And indeed, we do think, again, that it's working hand in hand, the regulators, the different stakeholders, and companies like all of us. And to do what? To actually also equip the regulators with new tools in a way, and new maybe ways of doing things. Because the problem here again is the pace. The pace of technology is super fast. The pace of regulation is what it is, with all the trade-offs that need to be made. but experimenting is possible. So instead of actually hindering a technology, no, we are not doing that. No, the good thing is to say, look, let's contour, let's bring some contours on the use of this technology for a given sector, for a given set of data, for a given companies, etc. And let's learn. Let's learn how this technology, the usage of the technology evolves with the regulators that can actually adapt as well about that. So we need indeed to be really in between, not to say, no, we are not regulating at all. Sure, we'll talk about responsibility, explainability, all good words, but at the end of the day, if we are just saying that, nobody will say, I don't want to do explainability and transparency, etc. But how do we measure that? How do we actually take those words seriously if they are not at the inception of those projects? Same time, let's not dwell on, using the data in all possible dimensions because it's advancing the field of technology. We need, again, to be in the middle, to experiment, to have, maybe for one of the first times, again, the shapers and the makers doing that together with the iterative cycles that are required in those conditions. It's hard, we're doing it, and I think that's where EU, that's where the GPI will also help, will spearhead some initiatives that will lead the way. And indeed, together with the principles of OECD, we will actually make that, again, at a broader scale. And we will have the countries who will be compliant with this way of playing with the rules, and those who won't be actually participating to that. And I think that in those cases, not having access to a market that will have that in the procurement, because that's how we want the society to evolve, I think that's probably the right call. But it's, again, we see all the sensitivity here. We see that it's a new way of developing together things. Nobody wants constraints. Nobody wants all the degrees of freedom either. And that's together by not avoiding the topic, but I actually working hard on discussing, on disagreeing as well. Let's agree to disagree so that we can converge in the best way. That's how we need to operate that.
Yeah, very, very good. I think an agreement, what is interesting is to go to pre-standardization to reach an agreement as well. So before any principles are baked into everyone's different approaches, because then it becomes politicized as well and becomes harder to work together and find commonalities. But I take it, from what you said at some point, that trust can come with more experimentation, as and I think that there's a key here that, as people become more familiar with the technology, that they can slowly adopt it and feel more comfortable with it. So now we're moving towards the last few minutes of our talk. I don't have questions from the audience so far. It's still time if you wish to post a question or two. But I'd like to ask you, Gohar, what are your what would be your final comment if you look at this conversation? We talked about many things. Maybe there's something you'd like to particularly contribute.
Well, thank you. But if you don't mind, I have one question to Yves, because he in the middle of the regulation, and also Canada, France, because Canada and France have been the pioneers to initiate basically the regulation, right? To regulating AI, according to the information I have. So what is the stage of the development? Because the huge difference, what I see, GDPR in Europe and in Canada, there is no such exact same, let's say, barrier as in Europe. How are you navigating this through while you are still going hand in hand? Because I try to understand this complexity, because AI itself is an extremely complex atmosphere itself, combining technologies and all the other ecosystem. So because that can be, in my opinion, that can be important foundation for coming up to regulated AI systems in the future. And then I'm happy to give my, final sentence. I will just be short. Okay, thanks.
That's a fantastic question. And again, I think that Canada and France have spearheaded those initiatives, but there is really a willingness to be inclusive as well with the other members. And definitely we could also mention, and we haven't, the Gaia X initiative, who started in Germany and then was adopted on the cloud, sovereign cloud initiatives by other countries. So I think that those multi clusters, in a way, that are important. And coming back to Johannes' point on the super clusters, we have one in Montreal where both CGI and ElementAI are funding members of the Scale.ai on applying AI to the supply chain for the Canadian companies and developing the technologies, providing the services. It's definitely hard. What we can see also in the dynamics between Canada and Europe, who've got a pretty recent trade agreement. As you know, with the US, Canada had a long time agreement already in place. And obviously, there are many companies from Canada who've got an office in the US. What we can observe is that more and more Canadian companies are also opening offices in Europe, in France, in the UK, and in other countries from Europe. Why? Because, again, there is this kind of like-minded way of approaching the market, of approaching some principles for the societies that resonate a lot. It's true through the scientific collaborations. It's true from on some sectors of the industry. Could be transportation. That could be on pharmaceutical industry, on other industries. Coming back to your point, Gohar, I think that AI is a technology. Some of it is new, some of it is not new. Regulating a technology makes, barely some sense. You can regulate an industry through the technology, more difficultly the technology per se. But you can actually bring some principles. What is ethical AI? What is responsible AI? How to inject that in your products and services? That's the chart de Montréal, who was actually about this responsible AI and signed by many countries. That was actually in our offices of ElementAI in Canada. So we are very happy to contribute to that. But maybe through the pharmaceutical, the transportation, etc., substantiating a technology or instantiating a technology for a given sector will be far easier to actually have those regulation and technology working together and leading to meaningful policies and regulations. That's really, again, industry sectors and technology converging where we can far more easily substantiate those aspects.
Okay.
Very quickly, my final notes. I'm very positive, and because my later, I'm highly positive towards the evolution of technologies because it's natural evolution. That's the next step. And I can only say that we need to be open-minded, and I believe in partnership as well. So that's the way we can gain maximum in collaboration, in a partnership, not only the country-wise, but also multidisciplinary type of organizations and mindsets and similar mindset together. So that's my final note. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gohar. Perhaps, Johannes, a final word. I know that you probably have your final word, but then this, a participant that's asking broadly if you could assess the EU-Canada cooperation on AI. Maybe that's a nice way to end the discussion too.
Yeah, again, maybe can only repeat myself. I think it's a great opportunity to, great countries or great group of countries, and there's a lot to learn from each other. I think collaboration is key. Would be one of my summary points that. There's great ideas on the one side of the Atlantic and then also on the other. So to bring it together and collaborate, that's great. And then maybe to focus on these different building blocks that you have. I think something like a protectionist or sovereignty would go the wrong way. I think the right way is how to work together. I mean, when it comes to all this, what we need really is more investment and is more talent, is the right balance for a regulatory approach, is trust. And if we want to foster that, it would best work to if we collaborate, like especially for the talent of AI. I mean, nowadays with Corona, we've seen that it's possible to work from anywhere in the world, but also collaboration in research and education will be extremely useful there. When it comes to investment, also I think to be open-minded there, and definitely Europe should take an example from looking at North American levels of AI funding. I think it's what we're seeing now with the different economic rescue packages is a step in the right direction to focus on the green and the digital transformation and to have a big impact for AI. But yeah, I think definitely let's not stop now. Let's do even more, and then focus on the uptake. But most importantly, let's collaborate and let's achieve this together. Then we will get the best results.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's a nice saying that summarizes what you said, which would be, I think it's an African proverb or something that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think this is the spirit in which many of you today share, that it would be positive to do it in with global frameworks, using the relationship between the EU and Canada and all these frameworks that they created together. Thank you so much for all your contributions today and for joining. I'd like to also thank the audience for being around, and I will see you all again in 1 minute for the next panel on the financial services. But in the meantime, Yves, Johannes, and Gohar, thank you so much, and I wish you a great rest of the day. It was nice to connect with you on this.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Eline.
Bye.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you have time to breathe, Eline?
I'm sorry?
Do you have time to breathe in between?
I have still to take a sip of water, which I will do now. Yeah, it's a busy topics that we're talking about, and there's lots to discuss, and the perspectives are diverse, so makes it interesting, and it's a gym. So I see we have Olga trying to join us.
Hi, Nadiya.
Hello, Christian. Hello, Eline.
Hi. So Nadiya, you are in Brussels, correct?
I am, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And Christian, you're in Quebec?
In Quebec, Bromont more specifically, yes.
Bromont, okay. Okay. And we have Olga joining from London. I'm waiting for our team.
We have an all-women's panel.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah. Nice.
Let's show them.
We're outside competition. There is nothing to show.
You're right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we are live now. Oh, hello, Christian. So hello, everyone, and welcome back to those of you joining the EU-Canada Business Summit 2020 and this conversation for the next hour. To our audience online, thanks for joining. Feel free to, again, engage on social media, on Twitter, and write your questions in the Q&A section of this platform so that we can ensure some level of interaction towards the end between you and our experts today. So the theme of this panel, which I'll have the pleasure to moderate, is about financial services. Just to briefly set the scene, the effects of the pandemic may be stronger than those of the 2008 financial crisis, which we all remember fondly, but the financial sector and international trade will not come out of today's recession unscathed. And with corporate and household indebtedness increasing, also banking risks are increasing. You have issues of credit misallocation, credit losses, and possibly banks' insolvency. And over time, that may affect the traditional value-driving functions within the banking sector. And for instance, one of the trends we might be looking at today is the rise of fintech within that sector. Now, against this background, how is the current context challenging the role of international financial services? And what is it that matters on the agenda of stakeholders in this sector? And with us to discuss this today, it's a pleasure to introduce our, for now, 2, but very soon, hopefully 3 distinguished speakers. We have Christian Fayad, who's the Strategic Development Director at the consulting firm Cible Solutions, joining us from Quebec. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you for being here. And we have Nadiya and Nychay, partner at the multinational law firm Dentons, and you are joining us from Brussels.
Hello.
Hello, and finally, hello, last but not least, Olga. Vovk, thank you so much for joining us from London. You are Senior Regional Manager, Western Europe Export Development Canada, EDC.
Hello, and apologies for the technical challenges.
We've learned to live with those things now with all the webinars, so no worries at all. Thank you for joining. I'd like to first, kick off the discussion with a broad question, and maybe asking each of you one at a time. So starting with you, Nadiya, what are the long-term impacts that you think the COVID crisis will have on financial companies involved in international trade and such other stakeholders?
Thank you very much, Eline. I think I couldn't agree more with you. One of the first things you said is that from the pandemic, the financial services sector has not been spared. And I think that is extremely true and correct, especially if you have the same vision of the role the financial services sector plays in the economy that I have. I visualize the financial services sector as a system that delivers oxygen to the economies. So if the economy is not doing well, neither can the financial system. And the rapid spread of COVID-19, as well as the measures taken by the governments to contain it, have had serious consequences for the world's major economies, because major production activities have been disrupted, starting in Asia, continuing to Europe, in North America, and the rest of the world. And then you had a massive border closures, and then you had a steep rise in unemployment and a shrink and steep reduction in the demand for goods and services. So as this has been felt throughout the economies, and trade and merchandise being shrunk by 3% year on year, around 18%, this is according to World Trade Organization's estimates, this has been a historically large and perhaps the steepest on record impact on the economy. So the leaders in the financial services sector have faced unprecedented challenges for once. And these were all connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the first challenges, and I think everyone who is working remotely can understand the challenge that financial institutions have faced with, is inspiring the employees. Because financial service providers had to resume their fluidity of operations while securing the same level of services for people and the employees working remotely. And employees in the financial sector have been achieving the same levels of productivity, or trying to achieve the same levels of productivity, as if they were working on the ground in their usual locations. This phenomenon of remote working has not really been studied or understood really well from the very beginning. I think when at the initial stages of the pandemic, and maybe my colleagues will agree, some may have welcomed the possibility of working remotely from home. I think over time we had felt that when working from home becomes a default function, a default position, the lines between professional and personal life become blurred. And so then you don't have this possibility of disconnecting, relaxing, and enjoying in the same ways your spare time with your family as you would otherwise. So keeping and minding the well-being of the employees for financial institutions long-term becomes an important consideration, probably the core consideration, because the functions that financial institutions perform are those performed by their employees. The same is true for customers, and this becomes a sort of a professional challenge for financial institutions, in my opinion, because they need to continue to provide liquidity and support the customers that are undergoing these temporary difficulties and serve the forbearance in these difficult circumstances. And this means engaging heavily in the digital delivery of services. This becomes essential to the operations, and so maintaining the same level of activity on a digital platform becomes key. Previous speakers have focused on the importance of converge aspects of AI and economy, and I think the same is true in the financial space. You have to be able to converge technology and the financial services in a way that makes it an efficient delivery of services to the same quality as before. In the delivery of financial services, a third challenge that has been clearly faced is in the space of reliance on suppliers and third-party dependency, because these parties are service providers, some as outsourcing partners, and ability to monitor the space in which the third parties operate is critically important. So not only were the financial institutions required to know what's going on in their own proper microclimate or microclimate, they were also required to know what happens with their counterparts around the world. They needed to also effectively communicate the policy measures that are taken to address COVID measures, remain transparent in the way they delivered their service and faced the challenge, and of course, on a practical level, be sure that to have enough liquidity to cope with that. And speaking of, Eline, to your point about previous financial crises, at least one of the outcomes of the previous economic crisis is that in the European Union, the regulation has been amended to secure enough liquidity, so requiring the banks to keep enough capital on the ground to be able to face unprecedented challenges like this one. And I think maybe the last one I would focus on is scenario planning as a challenge for financial institutions, because they really operate on the borders of imagining how our economy will look years and years ahead. They are forebearers of the interconnected system, and they need to be able to visualize and imagine it years from now. And so it is important for them to be able to realize that in terms of their scenario planning, they need to now factor in a completely new situation, which may not have a definitive end to it, but a reality that will look different to what has been known before the COVID-19 pandemic. That stems from major operations, minor operations, particularly with taking on board the most recent developments in the payments methods. Everything being disrupted, payment methods have not been disrupted, but they've become more digital. So I think the financial institutions now need to reimagine the way in which services not just delivered, but in the manner in which services are consumed.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting, as you mentioned some of these key challenges. So I'm seeing designing the future is a great one. How to reinvent itself, and also how I like how you linked that also back to the future of industry. How much it depends on the societal impact that this crisis had, because of it affected people. So the performance of people is affected, and that affects an entire industry. So thank you so much for sharing those insights. So you do mention that there are some examples of these concerns. I'd like to ask Christian, Fayad, what does the COVID crisis mean for strategies and development prospects? Do you see similar examples of the concerns that Nadiya shared with us? Do you see any other challenges as well?
Well, thank you very much, Eline. I think one of the biggest challenges today that we're living with COVID is how corporations are integrating corporate philanthropy within their actions. And I think this is the subjects that I would like to talk about today with you, because we know with the pandemic, it resulted with much less individual donation, and we need the company to transform the way they see the giving to others by really applying social corporate philanthropy philanthropy. So for me, in some other words, it's time to reset. It's time to dream together for a few minutes and see how we can make a better world, a world where each one of us should ask themselves how we can do better and how we can contribute to change this society to become a better place for all. There are still corporations that are still living in the 20th century, thinking that all they need to do is employ people, pay taxes, obey by the law, and provide support to community through charity. This has really changed with the latest social change that occurred with the unprecedented impact of the health pandemic. Now, companies are seen as the most important person to make a difference and a social impact, and the communities are relying on these societies to take their role, and consumers are becoming, especially millennials, are becoming more and more severe or more and more picky at choosing which company they will support. So if there's a message that I want to say today in this forum, is corporate philanthropy is becoming more and more important for organizations to make a real social impact. Because each one of us, when we consume and purchase something, we will ask ourselves what this company has done to make the world a better world to live in. Which cause have they adapted to? How will they make a difference in their community? We saw after the pandemic started in March that a lot of companies out there have taken a new road for success. Some of them has helped poverty, has helped women abuse. There are so many things that companies have made to stand out in the public's eyes. And those are the companies that will be the leaders of tomorrow. Those are the companies that the consumers will support. And I think that this is the same across border as well for the European and for the Canadian companies. I strongly believe that corporate philanthropy and making a social impact will really be carving the way for the leaders of tomorrow. And not only for consumers for sure are the ones that will consider what companies are doing when deciding, but they're also investors. We see more and more social impact investment happening in the world, and people are looking at investing in companies that are making differences. So again, I urge companies to really consider corporate philanthropy. I know that most companies, big companies, are doing CSR, but CSR is one part. But corporate philanthropy is part of the CSR, but can also live by itself. So my message to all the companies out there is, look at how you can make a better impact and what is the message that you are communicating out there to your consumer, investors, stakeholders, and work together to make the world a better place to live.
Well, thank you. And I think maybe I can connect back to what was said earlier about designing a different future for industries and how to reinvent itself. Perhaps some sectors can pick corporate philanthropy investment as an important priority moving forward. Do you see any evolution in that? I mean, is there a growing trend in philanthropy investment over the next, say, 10 years?
Oh, I totally see that. I think everyone, there are some buzzwords right now going everywhere. What is your social impact? What is the social investments? Everybody's talking about these buzzwords, but not everybody is knowing what they mean. And yes, I totally see a big trends happening in the next 10 years, especially, like I said, with the actual economic situation caused by the pandemic, and with the new millenniums entering the market, the working market, demanding that there are differences being made. So yes, totally. I think that the social investments are gonna evolve with times in the next 10 years, and social impact will be part of that evolution, where people will be measuring where they will be investing and why should they be investing in such or such enterprise. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Christian. Turning to you, Olga, and perhaps moving back to a little bit back into the conversation we had about the concerns for industry and the stakeholders you work with, and if you can concur on some points and maybe add some of what you've seen has become of significant importance on the agendas of stakeholders in the financial industry. Hi, Olga, can you hear me? Olga? I'm not sure she can hear us. No. Hello? No. I think she might have frozen. Well, we'll see then. Later, we'll reconnect with. Oh, she's moving. I have Olga.
Hi. Unfortunately,
I don't know
the question at all. So if we can make
I was just asking
the microphones, because
I cannot hear you. Can you hear us?
Sorry, I can't hear
that's
anything.
a problem.
Yes,
Okay, you can.
hear
Maybe
now.
it's a connection problem. I was just wondering if you could, going back to what we discussed earlier, as the industry has been taking a hit, what do you see are some of the major concerns, and what's really important right now on the agendas of the stakeholders you work with from your perspective?
Okay, I will try to respond because in all honesty, the question still came up in a scrambled way. So I think you were asking about us working with different stakeholders, and probably to give a little bit of EDC's perspective on the current situation, and how it is impacting us and other probably financial services or advice. Obviously, as a crown corporation, our mandate has been always to facilitate and create trade. And in very simple terms, we help Canadian companies to grow and succeed internationally. Now, with the current crisis, which it kind of happened very fast, the provide additional to
You're breaking up.
The liquidity front. But in addition to our regular disclosure to help and support to all Canadian companies, whether they're exporting from Canada or not. So one of the programs that probably a lot of companies heard about is Business Credit Availability Program, or BCAP. And it is kind of important from working with different stakeholders, because we work with various financial institutions, whereas we provide the guarantee to them for various loans. And those solutions, they're available to SMEs and larger Canadian companies as well. I think one key element in terms of working with different stakeholders and working with the companies is in this situation, it's kind of a movable feast. Then changes all the time, and we are in a kind of like the from an idea how solutions that were implemented whether companies or they are not. And this constant feedback collaboration gives all of us an opportunity to adjust those solutions so that we can offer the best possible way for companies to fare this storm. Obviously, initially it was launched and sort of the increased mandate or extended until the end of next year. However, obviously, we don't know how the crisis will develop. We don't know which path the virus may take, and obviously, as the situation evolves, the solutions and the support that we can provide will obviously be adjusted. And just to probably talk about kind of both sides of the pond, by helping Canadian companies helps their counterparties in case of the Canadian companies exporting, because they can offer the uninterrupted services, so there is no interruption in the supply chains of, for example, European companies or any other companies around the globe that Canadian companies are trading with, and we ensure that they have enough liquidity and working capital to manage themselves during this crisis. Mm-hmm. So that's probably a short answer. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, no, it's very useful. You mentioned the need for liquidity and working capital, and the change of the mandate to Canadian companies. So the government has been basically allowing them to grow and expand internationally with that, and that's very important now because the government asked them to step in, didn't ask just exporters, but all companies. Could you share a little bit what your thoughts are when it comes to the recovery plans and the sustainability priorities that we discussed also earlier today? What does that mean for the financial industry? Are there any particular limitations or opportunities that you see there? Olga? Or maybe someone else wants to react until we get Olga back.
Sorry, what do you mind repeating that last bit?
Yeah, thanks for sharing the part of how the role of companies are changing. And I'd like to know if you could comment on what the recovery plans and the sustainability priorities mean for the financial industry, if you can see some limitations or opportunities with those objectives. I'm not sure we can. Did you hear us? Hello? Can you? So maybe.
It's really, yeah, if you hear me, it's really, I don't know, for some reason I have difficulty hearing what you are saying.
Oh, okay. Well, I can maybe copy paste in the chat box a question, and in the meantime, maybe Nadiya, if you heard me, okay, would you have a reaction to that question? I cannot hear you, Nadiya. Oh, we have a few problems here.
It's okay. It's because I wanted to make sure Olga has enough broadband. I've cut my microphone, but I think the question that is on everyone's mind is how to keep competitiveness in this very difficult marketplace, right? And I think one thing that one has to understand or remember about competitiveness of businesses is that it will be primarily shaped by how businesses view future economic conditions. And the problem of our day and age and the situation we're currently in is that it's very difficult to create a module, know exactly and imagine what will be the future economic conditions and how quickly one can adapt to these conditions. So I think one thing that will be key for the financial services sector and for other sectors impacted by the COVID-19 crisis is to not only continue to do their job, but remain competitive. And in the current climate of pandemic, I think focus in the competitiveness shifts from competing for new markets to merely staying afloat and keeping the existing client base, because the situation is quite dire. And you also have seen response from the national governments from the get-go in the pandemic, which was they enacted stringent trade regulations and restrictions for certain essential supplies. They have also, to some extent, liberalized access to some of the essential materials in their markets, but it was quickly obvious that countries need to act together. So in the financial services market, because everything is so interconnected, it is clear that both the European Union and Canada need to work together and as part of the community. Part of the response, of course, can be sought in CETA. CETA has this in our Article 17 provides for a financial services committee that is established in order to really address the challenges that the financial service market is facing, and in the culture of liberalization that has been created through CETA, but also previously through GATS. I think what is possible to achieve is a dialogue under the auspices of this committee that would help really address the concerns that have been derived from the pandemic. And the first thing that the committee could do is potentially look into the trade aspect of the pandemic and how it impacts the financial services providers, discern the measures that can aid in the economic recovery, both of the financial institutions and the customer base, because two go together, and plan systemic reforms if need, potentially with designing necessary convergence of regulatory measures that would aid in the recovery. The particularity of the financial sector in Canada, at least, is that it's quite different in structure to the European Union market, because in the European Union, for all aspects of the financial service providers, we have convergence of rules into one body. We have an internal market, whereas in Canada, the regime is quite different, and it differs from provinces to territories. For instance, in the insurance brokerage, in handling of certain aspects of fiscal advice. It is really from province to province. So I think eventually these prudential carve-outs that are provided for in the CETA agreement will need to be taken to the next level, and authorities in both sides of the Atlantic will need to explore possibility of creating some form of convergence of the regulatory regime in order to enable not only swift provision of financial services, but also to the point Christian made, which is an excellent point about philanthropy, because philanthropy needs to be able to not be national, but be cross-border and global. And that means that philanthropists need to be treated in equal manner, regardless of the origin. And the philanthropists need to be able to channel the funds and support a cause, regardless of the borders. And borders become, at this point, really a formality, particularly in the digitalized world. So I think there is a lot to do. And certainly CETA could be one of the instruments provided in CETA could be an interesting solution, and others are, of course, including World Trade Organization as another possibility and a forum for deciding how to aid in the context of pandemic. Eline, we cannot hear you.
I both have this problem of unmuting myself after lots of practice, trust me. But yeah, thanks for mentioning those multilateral fora as a way to support the competitiveness of industry. You mentioned the World Trade Organization and also the Canada-EU, the CETA. And you also talked about the philanthropy aspect of things, and how I take it as if there's no convergence of regulation and there's different structure between countries, it might be more difficult to make that happen. Would you agree, Christian, to what you heard from Olga? From Nadiya, sorry.
Sorry, can you just, so you say that philanthropic would be harder cross-border? Is that what you're saying?
It could be difficult if there is no convergence of regulations, perhaps as far as investment across borders are concerned, or if there's different in structure, like it's the case between Canada and Europe. Could that impact?
I think, you know, there's a lot of different forms of philanthropy, and I was looking yesterday at the CETA, and I looked at, you know, how CETA has made it easier for company staff and other professionals to work on each side of the Atlantic. And I was asking myself, you know, how can philanthropy contribute to that, especially in the new world today that is all virtual? And what came to my mind is really today, if we use all these skill-based people across border and use them as volunteers, you know, to share their expertise cross borders with business goals that are similar or different, to really create an impact. I strongly believe that CETA, allowing these people to share their expertise, normally they would travel and exchange, but today with the new virtual world, I think by doing some skill-based volunteerism and sharing their expertise in IT and intelligence, artificial intelligence, and all these things that are strong across borders, I think that's a way of using philanthropy and also helping the company's image to show that they're making a real difference cross borders. As well, you know, there are many companies that operate cross borders where certainly need want to make a difference and need to put together campaigns and events to help poverty, women, children, etc. So I don't think there is any borders. I think there's one world today to make goods, and you know, as my president would say, you know, we must make a better world for all, and that's what philanthropy is all about. And CETA for me is just an opportunity. It's just an opportunity for us to use the advantage towards what's that been given, to use the people across border to help each other. I don't know if I was very clear about explaining my thing, but you know, philanthropy can take so many different aspects, but one of them today is especially sharing expertise through volunteers.
Yeah, and industry-led practices can be very helpful in accelerating that. No, that's very interesting and very clear to me. And you mentioned we've talked about borders, and then we have Olga back with us. Maybe Olga, you have a reaction on how you know, international financial services supporting investment and business actions abroad can you know, can carry out activities in the meantime, while we see borders is still, you know, difficult thing in the current context. I think we still don't have Olga with us. So,
hi, yeah, I think I have the same problem. So I cannot hear what you are saying. So it comes unfortunately very jammed on my end.
So I'm gonna post a question in the chat for you right now. So maybe you can react on this one, as we discuss the role of borders and the impact on international financial services. So in case you'd like to take the word, you can have it. But I'm not. Maybe I should turn to another question.
Maybe, if I may, Eline, for a second, I want to comment on what Christian said, because I think there is one aspect that needs to be flagged, even though it's perhaps, I don't know to which extent it is directly in the spectrum of financial services, but it is certainly relevant because, Eline, you talked about it, as did Christian. I think I agree that philanthropy should not have borders, but the legal reality of treatment of philanthropy and companies that are engaged in philanthropic activities is different. There are borders, and that is a problem. And even though philanthropy across Europe has been quick to respond to COVID-19, and in Canada as well, there are philanthropic foundations that have distributed over 100 million Canadian dollars in emergency funds, I think we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of regulatory and cumbersome procedures for philanthropic organizations to conduct their activity. And so far, there hasn't been even a helpful response in the European Union. So much so that the donor and foundation network in Europe, Daphne, has written a letter to the European Commission saying, look, we are trying to help, but we have identified several issues you can help us with in order to be able to help you in the pandemic, and we cannot address them without your help. And one was that you must enable equal treatment of cross-border philanthropy and not discriminate against us. They have also said that you have to treat foreign-based public benefit organizations as comparable local ones, and you don't. There is difference even in how EU member states treat different philanthropic organizations from other member states. There is even a tax burden on certain in-kind donations in Spain, up to 21%. So you want to help, and then you're being taxed on it. And obviously, philanthropic organizations are quite appalled by the treatment in fiscal terms. They also speak about necessity to adjust even the governance of the philanthropic organizations, because a lot of regimes require in-person presence for decisions to be taken on philanthropic purposes, and that makes it in tele-regime very difficult to achieve. So law has to follow. So I think even though the aspiration is there for philanthropic activity to be without borders, the reality today is that it is.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, Nadiya, and thank you for adding that information. I was looking at that more on a human perspective, less on a fiscal and tax perspective. But thank you for adding that connotation to that. If I may, if we still have time, Eline, I just want to talk about a little bit about the advantages of corporate philanthropy. You know, not only will it help the consumer, as I mentioned, purchase your brand. We know, I just looked at some figures yesterday that an Elderman report was conveyed in 12 countries, and it says specifically that 71% of the people agree that the brand is if the brand is putting profit over people, they will lose their trust in the brand forever. So these are significant numbers telling the companies out there that they should really take that avenue of corporate philanthropy. As well, 85% of the respondents said that they want the brands to use their power to educate. That means offering instructional information about how to protect themselves in times of pandemic. We see that, for example, Microsoft Healthcare has helped the CDC with a website to the United States. We see Club Med has done different things to help people do fitness at home while the pandemic, and many, many other examples. But as well, not only consumer will benefit from corporate philanthropy, but also employees. You know that nowadays, especially with COVID and prior to COVID, keeping employees engaged and recruiting talents and talents and keeping them was very difficult. So corporate philanthropy really gives power to these companies to recruit employees, to engage them, and to really work towards the same cause. And I think that's one of the advantage that we should look at when we look at corporate philanthropy, among so many others.
Thank you, Christian. I have a question from a participant, Renaud Lamoureux. Thank you very much for joining with this question. So let's see who wants to react to that. So prior to COVID, he writes, financial services were coping with strict regulatory scrutiny, high core tier 1 ratios, low interest rates, and growing pressure from fintech. Now everyone is expecting bankruptcies that will increase the default rate on the existing portfolio of loans. Are you concerned that newcomers to the EU market will have a hard time finding local funding to finance their European expansion plans, and I would say even beyond the EU market? Anyone would like to take this one? It's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. Let's see if I can attempt an answer, even though it's very complex.
Beyond the EU market. Anyone? Go on.
So some of the challenges that financial sector is facing now is that they have to deliver their core services in the environment where they're exposed to increased risks, typical standard industry risks such as fraud, such as cyber resilience, data security, anti-money laundering, and customer due diligence has to continue smoothly even though everybody operates in a digital environment. They have to watch out for market integrity and abuse. They have to mind people's behavior, managers, customers. But everyone understands that there's been a huge pressure on the financial institutions currently because more than at any time before, they are really stretched thin because they're following on so many fronts at the same time. The role or the future of the newcomers is certainly something that does not escape European Union's attention. European Union, and especially if this question concerns small and medium-sized businesses, I have to say that European Union in 2014 started an initiative, COSME initiative, that promotes the competitiveness of the small and medium-sized enterprises. That program runs through this year, and the object of it was really to help small and medium-sized enterprises across the European Union find a way to secure the necessary means in order to establish themselves and be competitive enough to export their products and services overseas. It is also true, and that is, I think, one of the questions that Eline has asked us, but we didn't yet come around to commenting, that as a result of the pandemic, the foreign direct investments have been limited, but all activity, because of the inability of people to travel, has been limited. International Monetary Fund has said that donors globally have withdrawn massive amounts of funds from the fund for developing countries because they're unable to cope with their own domestic needs. I think it is true that the European Union has a program currently in place to help small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think it is also going to be true that the program will not simply end in 2020. And what I think we do know already is happening. European Union has adopted a digital platform. If I remember, this was just recently in September this year, Digital Operational Resilience Act. The purpose of which, the DORA, the purpose of which is to ensure that the community can withstand the challenges of the COVID and the pandemic. I think European Union has been one of the pioneers in mobilizing resources and in creating partnerships that are beyond one geography. They have instilled several fora in initiatives to collect amounts of money and funds to support businesses. So I'm hoping that we can expect European Union to be willing to support newcomers in the EU market, even in this hard time where securing financing and funding is difficult.
Thank you. And I think what you mentioned earlier about, I think you've made an interesting comment in your introduction as well, saying that there is a need for the industry to transform and digitalize because of the crisis. It's a traditional industry, some say in many respects, with a heavy infrastructure and still regulations around it. And I know that for fintechs to build partnerships with banks, for example, that's very difficult. The fragmented market in the EU isn't necessarily making that easy. So that's an interesting trend to watch as well.
But Eline, can I comment on that? Sorry if I'm paralyzing
no problem.
The air. But I think it's interesting. I agree with Renaud because he's asking specifically and the pressure from fintechs. I think banking industry has to be on top of the game. They have to realize that they're competing with fintechs and that perhaps the solution is not in creating new products to survive in this competition, but to create partnerships, even if it's not evident, but additional platforms and visual solutions to the problem may not necessarily be in creating something that competes with fintech, but potentially in creating an amalgam of products that can coexist together. I think this would necessarily be a more efficient way of handling the competition, because the pressure is immense on price, on services, on expedience, and regulations is quite different. So I think the solution to that problem of competition is in partnership.
No, very true. I do think some banks are building partnerships with fintechs. The problem sometimes that we see is that fintechs very quickly bump into the issue of when they want to scale up, that's not necessarily easy for them. So they tend to leave the European market to go maybe to North America or the US.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely concur. And unfortunately, we've lost Olga again, but she wanted to react on Renault's question. So I think we are going to try to see if we can get her back. But in the meantime, maybe I could ask. She's back. Hi. Olga, can you hear us? You can react on the, because I know you wanted to react to Renault's question.
Yeah, I don't know if you still want me to answer the question regarding the increased difficulty of getting funding. I think there are two separate issues. I think Nadiya kind of alluded to this a little bit. So fintech will not substitute the funding, at least in the short run. So fintech will enable, if we're talking about especially larger scale projects, it is quite difficult to see, for example, that I don't know, renewable energy would be financed by fintech. So if an expansion of say a Canadian company into the European market, if there is basically an idea to sell goods and services to multiple markets. So I think in general, kind of fintech will help with a lot of things that financial institutions and investors are doing. In terms of the upcoming bankruptcies, I think companies that are expanding into the EU, they have also, I'm talking about, for example, Canadian companies, they have full access to raising funds in Canada for their international expansion. So, for example, we work, and this is kind of our regular activity. So we work with the Canadian financial institutions, and there are a number of programs that would help Canadian companies release working capital or get better funding for expanding into the, for example, European EU market. And I think once the companies are established in the EU, then they become, if they have a presence here and everything, then they become a company with the EU operations, with the same access to funding as any other EU companies. And obviously, this is true vice versa. So when European companies they go to Canada and they establish themselves in Canada, then we treat them as a sort of a Canadian company. Now, in terms of the increased bankruptcies, I think it is true that a lot of financial institutions, there is a larger, probably right now, there is larger provision for loan losses. The overall response right now is, or during COVID crisis, is much better than during 2008-9 financial crisis. So I think similar to sort of the program that we have with financial institutions, whereas the whole idea of providing a BCAP, this business credit availability program, which is a guarantee to financial institutions, is basically to allow them to lend to SMEs through these tough times, and financial institutions would essentially take not the risk of the SME, but they would take the AAA risk of EDC. And we would, if there are any losses, then obviously that's where the coverage is coming from. And I know that, talking about partners and others, sort of there are similar programs that are different in different countries. So European Union, ECB, there are different sort of programs established and arrangements with financial institutions here. Obviously, from a trade perspective, the ECAs, export credit agencies, they would support their through different programs. I think, hopefully we'll fare through this, or as British Brits would say, muddle through.
Yeah, muddle through. Thank you, Olga. Yes, indeed. Thanks for mentioning those support programs to SMEs. That's very insightful. And indeed, just maybe to wrap up during the last few minutes, Olga is hoping that we're seeing, potentially some hope for the sector. Can you tell me your thoughts on that, Nadiya, on the future of the industry? How concerned are you, or how hopeful are you?
Thank you, Eline. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I think the future is certainly in the digitalization, but it's also important to remember where it will manifest itself the most. And I can read on the tea leaves where we are going to go from the European Union perspective. They're probably lagging behind, but they are for the first time proposing new legislation on crypto assets. And so this regulation aims to boost innovation while preserving financial stability and protecting investors from risks while operating and placing crypto assets. I think this creates legal clarity. It also creates opportunities for those who are issuers and providers of crypto assets, passporting as well. I think the reality of the provision of financial services in the future will be quite different, and it will certainly center on the digital execution of payments, provision of services, dealing with crypto assets. And then somebody on the previous panel had said it's important that regulation keeps up. I would say, no, it's important that the regulation is ahead of its time. And so this is where the regulators have to be in contact with the scientific reality and all the innovation that is out there, because regulation post factum does not always help the businesses stay up to date and afloat and be prepared.
Definitely, it's this need for speed for regulation and anticipation, and hopefully we have some regulators that manage that, and we've seen that with the digital finance package of the Commission in particular. Indeed, yes, very true. Thank you very much for your insights again, Christian. Just one last word to you, because I was thinking back of what you said about the philanthropy aspects that are important for businesses and those that you advise, right? We heard digitalization is the future for that industry. Is that a strategy that you would recommend to institutions that you work with in order for them to stay relevant? Or what are the other strategies next to philanthropy?
Well, I think philanthropy is very important nowadays to stay afloat and to become the leaders of tomorrow. I think especially right now with the economic crisis that we are facing and the pandemic, I think that companies have to really stand out from the crowd and make a better world, make a social impact, and that's how they're gonna be supported by consumers, by stakeholders, by investors. And maybe on my last word that I would want to say is our collective actions can have an enormous impact when we work together to find solution. And that's all. That applies as well for cross-border finding solutions and working together with the different regulations and the different challenges that are there. So let me leave you with just a note. I was reading something yesterday and it just stood up and it made me happy to say that. So I'm going to say, when you're made a leader, you weren't given a crown. You were given the responsibility to bring out the best for others. So if if that means anything to you, it means a lot to me. So it's a message of hope, telling those leaders out there and those companies to work together at finding a way to make this world a better world, especially today, where they can really make a difference with philanthropic actions. And company like mine and others are there to support you in making your path for success in philanthropic, in corporate philanthropy. So I thank you very much for inviting me. I know my subject was quite different from the rest of the team, but I hope that you saw within me the passion that I have towards corporate philanthropy and how I believe this can make a huge change and impact in the society of today. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Christiane. I think this added a bit of originality in exchanging our views. So I'd like to thank you very much, each of you, for joining and for your dynamic insights. I know we've had a few technical issues, but nevertheless, I think this was a very interesting discussion. At least I've learned a lot. So thank you, Nadiya, Christiane, and Olga. And to everybody here, I hope you had a great day at the EU-Canada Business Summit 2020. The last part of the event is before the final networking time. Right now, we're going to hear an exclusive interview of Sam Ayoub with Pat Sherlock of Canada Goose International. So I will leave you with a great company. Thank you so much again, Sam, and to your fantastic team for putting this event together today and having us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eline. Thank you to you, actually. Very good job. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, so here we are, almost at the end of the day, the summit, and is Pat coming with us in a few seconds. We'll be waiting for him. So here we are, almost at the end of the day, the summit, and is Pat coming with us. Good job. Damn it. We'll be waiting for him. So here we are. Yeah, so I hope that you enjoyed so far the summit. I think we went in depth into a lot of topics with extraordinary conference speakers. Very glad to be able to gather all those conference speakers together in one day, talking about Canada and the European Union, which hasn't been done before, actually, here in Europe, from the capital of Europe here in Brussels. So I think it gives us thoughts and ideas about how we should work together as partners, either to have results in Canada or anywhere in Europe. And yeah, to go beyond the sympathy that we have for each other, to look furthermore, to have access to investments, partnerships, markets, coverage. So all those things is interesting to know more about Canada. As I'm, saying very often here in Brussels, we hear a lot about China, a lot about US, India, Africa. Canada, not so much. So we're here to change that. And I think we did that today as we're waiting for Pat. Pat is a very good example, an early example of Canada being in Europe and with a big success, and now all over the world. So waiting for him just for a few seconds, I hope. And
Sam, can you hear me?
Do the interview.
Sam, can you hear me? Yeah.
Pat, can you hear me?
I can hear him. I just can't, for some reason. I'm pressing apply.
But I can't hear you.
I'm pressing
let me. Oh, my fault. Here, can you hear me? Can you talk to me?
I can hear him totally fine. I just can't seem to get in.
I hear you now. This is what on my side, but I cannot see you though.
Can you hear me okay, Sam?
I hear you okay, but I cannot see you.
That's too bad. I even moved to a better internet connection in my office. I left the showroom, and yeah, apologies. You know what? If you guys just give me one quick second, I'll log out and log back in, and let's see if it works this time.
Do that. We have time. So yeah, Pat is definitely an example of Canada being in Europe. Pat, as you will know and get to know more about himself first, and the story of a Canada Goose in Europe, is investing in Europe. They've been investing in Europe since 2010, and now is based out of Zurich since 2018, so, and maybe 17, so 3 years from now, along with CETA. So I think there's a lot of things going on, both sides of the Atlantic, and we'll get through that with that example, with that perfect example of Canada being in Europe. One thing that I can tell you is that being, virtual, completely virtual, and you've noticed all the problems that we can run into. It's a workaround to be able to connect, but that will definitely not replace face-to-face meeting. Here we go. All right. Glad to see you and hear you, Pat. All right.
Hello, everybody. By the way, Sam, that last panel was fantastic. By the way, I really enjoyed that.
Okay, great.
All the panels have been great, but I think the last one in particular was very interesting.
Great, thank you. I did quite a big intro since you were struggling with the technical issues. But so I was talking about Canada Goose. How Canada Goose is an example on how Canada is in Europe. So I'm going to read a proper intro. Let's start with that, and then I'll ask you some question and go along with this interview. So I'm going to read it. So here it is. So yeah, as last but not the least, our panels today, we have the privilege to have with us Pat Sherlock as our honored guest speaker and the president of Canada Goose International. This panel will last for about an hour in the interview format, including Q&A. And I insist, if you can, participant, post your questions from now on, and we'll answer them more at the end of the panel, but you can post it just right away. Canada Goose goes back to 1957, when Polish immigrant Sam Tick founded Metro Sportswear in a small warehouse in Canada. Actual CEO Danny Reese joined the company in 1997, when Canada Goose generated at that time $3 million in annual revenue. Canada Goose began to expand internationally in 2010, as I said, when it opened an office in Stockholm, Sweden, for its European operations. In December 2013, Boston-based private equity firm Bain Capital acquired a 70% equity stake in Canada Goose at a $250 million valuation. So in 2017, shares of the company began trading on the Toronto Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. Pat is based out of Zurich, or Zug, near Zurich. I think it's a nice area to live in, and to cover all the European activities of Canada Goose since April 2018. So that's almost 3 years. On top of having in charge of brand new development in Middle East, Asia, South America, so that's pretty much everywhere outside of North America. So Pat, back to you. First question, in order to introduce yourself, what is your background and what did you do prior to join the team of Canada Goose in Canada and then in Europe? If you can tell me more about yourself.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Northern Ontario. If anyone's familiar with Sudbury, Ontario, that's where I grew up. It's about 4 hours north of Toronto. And I went to school at Carleton University, where I played basketball. Then I transferred to University of Winnipeg and played basketball out there. I graduated in business, and then moved back to Sudbury for a little bit with the family and decided to move to Vancouver. So my first real job after university was working for Radio Shack, believe it or not, years ago, selling cell phones in the late 90s in Pacific Center Mall in Vancouver. Yep. It was a great time to be selling cell phones. It was during the boom, and had a really good, had a lot of raw selling there. During that time, I'd always wanted to get into the beer industry. And it's like most people in their 20s, it's after university, that's something that a lot of people are pretty passionate about. But it was very difficult to get in. And through this agency I was working with at Radio Shack selling the cell phones, there was an opportunity to work with Labatt, which was part of Interbrew at the time, in northern British Columbia. So I moved to Prince George, rented a vehicle, and started my professional career in Prince George. And I would sell beer all the way up to basically Fort Nelson, which is close to the Northwest Territory border. So it was a lot of really good relationship selling, working with different communities up there, and it was actually a lot of fun. And then my 10-year career at Labatt's brought me to Belgium quite a bit, actually as part of Interbrew, and spent a lot of time. I was lucky enough to see breweries around the world. I worked in different markets across Canada. Calgary, I was based out of there for some time. Then I ended up in the Toronto head office. And that was during the time when Ambev was merging with Interbrew and became InBev. So there was a lot of mergers happening within the industry at that time. And then there was an opportunity from the beer business to work with someone who used to run Labatt's in Canada, who was running New Balance footwear. And I was looking for something new and exciting, something that I'm passionate about. And this was a natural fit. So had a great 5-year career at New Balance in a number of different capacities, and by the end was running Canadian business from a sales perspective, which was a great transition, and a great transition for me to Canada Goose, which is one of the very few companies with a global head office in this industry in Canada. Obviously, Lululemon in Vancouver is another one. So it was a no-brainer in 2012 to take on this opportunity, but it was really exciting about this. And I think what was so unique about my time in Canada is my time previous to Canada Goose was working with such a rich, diverse background of retailers in Canada.
So that was a good school to be in order to then to go to a higher level. I would say a company, international company, Canadian company, to go international. So to have those roots in Canada, to know the market well, and to know abroad as well, but by being Canadian and operating in Canada.
Yeah, it was a really strong foundation of learning. I mean, Canada has such a rich, diverse retail background. I mean, I was a director of sales in Canada before I took on the global wholesale role. So I was working very closely with Siemens, Ogilvy, Harry Rosen, still one of the best retailers in the world. So it was a really, and also working with a lot of really strong independent retailers and entrepreneurs. So it was a really strong foundation to help prepare me for a global role and representing Canada Goose around the world.
That's great. And then you've joined the Canada Goose team in Toronto, so back in Toronto.
Yeah.
And what did you do there, and what was the challenges there back then?
Well, the challenges were pretty, I mean, we've grown, the last 8 years have been ridiculous. It's been tremendous growth. I mean, we've seen incredible growth over the last 8 years. And, maintaining a very strong brand and being true to our brand throughout this whole time. There's a lot of pressures to just go after the revenue, but staying true to what the brand is and growing the right way with the right partners, creating the right experiences has been the driving force behind the brand. So having that certain level of discipline the whole time, and while scaling, like we've scaled a lot over the last 8 years, and it's been, what's been critical to that is also bringing in expertise and having a company culture that can embrace outside expertise and embrace new talent coming in, but still maintaining our values and being able to grow with all these different inputs as we grow and evolve. We're certainly, we've come a long way in 8 years, and that's from the infusion of new expertise that comes into the business while we grow and evolve within.
That's good. And then that was the big jump up above the Atlantic Ocean 3 years ago in Zurich, which is a nice place to live in or to be based in.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. Yeah, it's pretty beautiful here.
Some skiing there or no?
Yeah, we discovered skiing. We, as a family, living in Toronto, there's not a lot of real ski hills in that area, but
even in Belgium, it's pretty flat.
Yes, but the beer is great. But yeah, no, we've really embraced the Swiss lifestyle. It really is pretty incredible here, and just being in the center of Europe and what it's meant to my family to have this opportunity. We're extremely privileged to be here, for sure.
There was an office before in Zurich, and when you came into Switzerland, or you've launched that office 3 years ago?
There was a smaller office in Zug, but over the last 3 years, we've completely expanded. We've gone through a real transformation here. Europe and Canada, from our business perspective, it's high, and in general, but for us in particular, it's highly symbiotic. So it's not just Europe's not just a revenue stream for us or a regional revenue that we're getting. It's much more than that. It's highly symbiotic. We're highly integrated. From a manufacturing perspective, we do 10% of our manufacturing on products from Europe.
Okay.
Knitwear, the best place in the world to make knitwear is Italy. So we make our knitwear in Italy, just like the best place in the world to make parkas is Canada. So we're highly integrated from a production perspective, from a raw material sourcing perspective. We have 13 raw material suppliers here in Europe. From an organizational perspective, we have a highly integrated matrix organization. Our chief marketing officer, Penny, she's just down the hallway from me. So it's a highly integrated organization.
And by being so honest, being invested, humanly speaking, into Europe, Europeans like that. I mean, they share that. It's a value that they share and that they promote, actually. So you're not only there, as you said, in order to have another market and another point of revenue. So to be humanly invested with Europeans, to make friends, to make a human relation is very important.
Also from a design perspective. So we have designers based out of here as well. So we have that European perspective that's globally relevant. So yeah, we're highly integrated here. And that's a big part of my role when I came out here, is to really accelerate that. As well, I can imagine the complexity of our business, both on the front end and the back end, has been significant here. I mean, it's interesting it was interesting hearing the last panel, but we're dealing with a lot of complexity because we're dealing with so many different countries. There's legal complexity, there's financial complexity, there's compliance complexity, there's cultural complexity, there's channel complexity as we're scaling our retail stores, e-commerce throughout the world. There's a lot going on through this office. And the biggest thing and my number one focus has been bringing in really strong local expertise from Europe. And that's been really exciting for me, is to bring in great people with great retail experience from top tier companies from within Europe. And I'm learning from them. I didn't come over here as an expert on Europe. I'm familiar with Canada Goose and I've helped build the brand, but I'm really leaning on a lot of people here and I'm learning a lot from them as well.
That's great. And when we met back in Paris a few months ago, I mean, that was, before, obviously before the pandemic, you launched your boutique in Faubourg Saint-Honoré, which is quite a nice street to launch a boutique. And are you by the way, are you the only Canadian boutique on that street, on that very street? Do you know that? Or
we're the only luxury performance outerwear brand for sure in Canada, absolutely. And that's yes, we're very excited and very proud to be there. I mean, it's Paris. It's an institution in the world in terms of fashion. And we look to do that in major markets around the world. We're not opening stores up all over the place, but we do want to open up meaningful stores that are relevant to that city. And we want to create great moments in those brick and mortar environments. So what we try to do, and I think you experienced that in Paris, is we want to create a Canada Goose experience, but it's not cookie cutter across every store. It's also got that local relevance as well, from a design perspective, from an environment perspective. So it's not a generic Canada Goose experience, it's a Canada Goose Paris experience. Exactly. And it's really important that we have that local relevance and not just creating something completely generic around the world.
Because going frequently to Paris, I'm always surprised and impressed actually by the number of people, the ratio of how many people during wintertime are wearing Canada Goose coats. I mean, I would say easily 2 out of 4 people are wearing Canada Goose when it's very cold in Paris, which could last for a few days, maybe through the winter time. And at the same time, I felt and I sensed the excitement participating and going into the launching in the boutique at that time on Faubourg Saint-Honoré. It was, a lot of people, and it was quite a success back then.
It is, and it's a big milestone for us. I think that we've opened up in Milan since. We're about to open up in Berlin in early November. So there's a lot of, and I guess I'm lucky enough to have been around a while. I've seen us evolve in these markets. I've seen us evolve from a wholesale perspective, from a sales agency perspective. The brand's evolved, and it's another major milestone for us to open up these amazing experiences for consumers. It's a really big deal to see that evolution.
In my intro, I said that you've done things originally from Stockholm, Sweden. What happened back then? Did you open did you launch a boutique, or what if we're going back?
If we go way back then, so this is, back when Danny was just out of university, and he was working in a family business, he was spending some time in Scandinavia, different trade shows. And you can imagine back then, this is late 90s, what the trade show booth might have been, the size of our business. It probably wasn't. It would have been nice to see some photos of that. We don't have any, unfortunately, but it was early days for Canada Goose. And what Danny noticed when he was in Scandinavia, both in Copenhagen and Stockholm, he was seeing people wear Canada Goose like you'd wear a Swiss watch. Big, giant expedition parkas, but it was a parka made in Canada, just like a Swiss watch is made in Switzerland. And they look great. And it all started, that was where it all started, which is that being relevant, being authentic, made in Canada means a lot, especially for a parka brand. And that's how it all began. And that's fueled this business. That moment has fueled this business and where we are today. And we still remain completely committed to making products in Canada, scaling our manufacturing infrastructure in Canada. What we have done is we've also, 90% of our production is done in Canada, 10% is done outside of that, but we're also the other place to go find the best items in the world from the best places in the world, which is knitwear made in Italy.
That's great, and you've mentioned, Canada in Europe, but also how Europeans are sensible about the design of the fashion industry coming out from where you've opened and launched boutiques in Milan and Paris and London, now soon Berlin. So this got something to do with the design of your parkas as well. And I've noticed when I've been going to participating in the launch of the boutique in Paris, that there were some pretty nice looking parkas coming from well designed. And I'm talking about, let me see here, it's to say things right. Cultural identity of Canada. Tell me more about it. I will share.
Yeah, Project Atigi, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, from Inuit.
Yeah, the original parka maker. So, and it was really nice. It was really nice seeing you there.
That's it's very important for Europeans. That make them dream, about Canada, the parka, the reality up north of Canada, and even Canadian don't know much about that reality. So I think it's a very interesting topic to address.
Yeah. So Project Atigi it's also has to do with it's a great program, and it's something we're quite proud of. So it all started with we had a sewer from the north, an Inuit sewer. She was down in our facilities years ago, and she saw these older fabrics and trims that were being used, and she said, "Can I bring those back up north?" And then this whole concept started of, well, they've been making parkas in the north, in the northern communities, in the Inuit communities for generations. And they are the original parka makers. And Atigi actually stands for parka. So what we did, and what Danny's idea was, is to create what we call resource centers, where we take all of our excess fabric, excess trims, and we'd ship them up north and create these community events in these small northern communities. I was very lucky to go to one in particular, and it was in Pond Inlet in Baffin Island. So if anyone's been lucky enough to go to the far north, it's an amazing experience that I hope everyone gets an opportunity to do one day. But being with these communities, going to the community centers, rolling out these fabrics and giving to the sewers, the kids were all there. It was these community events. It was very special. And then you get to see what they've done with the previous fabrics from previous years, and they make the most beautiful things. And so as this resource center evolved over the years, we thought, well, let's create some social entrepreneurship and allow them to benefit from this as well around the world. So it's a great program. It's a great social entrepreneurship program. And you were able to experience that in Paris, and to be able, I was lucky enough to be in Pond Inlet to see this firsthand, but then see the evolution of the program, to have these parkas in Paris displayed. And what we've done is we've commercialized those, and all the proceeds go back to the community. So last year we did 90 parkas with 18 designers. We generated about $75,000 for the community, and we're planning on doubling that this year.
So they're popular. How do you evaluate the popularity of those parkas now in Europe?
I think it really resonated with Europeans. I think anything authentic really resonates with European consumers. Yeah, and I think that it has. It's meant a lot to consumers here. It's meant a lot to the sewers from the Inuit communities, and it's going to continue to evolve, and this is going to get bigger and bigger each year.
That's great. Good idea. Very good. Congratulations on that. Unfortunately, I tried to share the pictures that I did in Paris. Technical issues. I mean, I invite you to go maybe to your site. You have some samples or examples of.
You can, yeah, or you can just Google Project Attigi Canada Goose, and you'll see a great visual of all the different parties at these.
Here you go. So I invite all the participants to go there. Danny Reese is the grandson-in-law of the founder of the company, renamed as Snow Goose in Canada, but Canada Goose in Europe, as the name Snow Goose was already registered in Europe. Danny Reese realized that European customers associated the product with idealized images of Canada. So Canada Goose was definitely a good brand name, and is now the brand name for every market in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong. Rapidly became a strong brand name, just like I found that the other big brand name is Canada Dry, which used the word and the country Canada. So I was interesting. I'm coming from the marketing, side business. And how do you compare those two brand names with the name Canada? One is very old, I mean, and still relevant, still out there, Canada Dry and Canada Goose. What can you tell me about those two brands?
I could say that in my 8 years at this company, I've never once had the comparison to Canada Dry, but I think it's interesting. It's good. It's good. I think it's an interesting one. I don't think it's as comparable from a brand perspective, but I think there's an association in terms of where something should be made, right? So of course, the best jackets in the world, the best protective jackets in the world, and the best outerwear in the world should be made in Canada from our perspective. So we think there's a lot of it really resonates from that sentence.
Okay, good. And you are capitalizing, I think, on the very good image of Canada around the world. Does it help you doing business more efficiently here in Europe? How does it help the Canadian brand? How do you?
I think that the Canadian brand is. Let's be honest, the Canadian brand is strong. I think people around the world value Canada and what Canada stands for. So I think it's we take that role seriously. The fact that we have Canada in our name, and I can't explain to you what a privilege it is and an honor it is to represent Canada through Canada Goose to the world, whether it's in Japan, Korea, you name it. To be able to represent Canada, we take that very seriously
as well.
Beg your pardon?
It's kind of a responsibility as well to talk about Canada and to have Canada into your brand name, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we've benefited from that, from the good nature of Canada, and I think that we take that very seriously. I think it's important for us to have. One thing that we've been able to do as a business, even though we were quite small, we always had global reach. So we're available around the world.
Yeah.
But we're also locally relevant, right? So the fact that we are a Canadian company, that we're so closely associated with Canada, allows us to have that reach, but also that local relevance in every different place in the world. People resonate. It resonates with people. It's an easier lift from a brand perspective.
Okay.
We have to deliver on that promise. Every time someone puts a garment on, they have to feel a certain way and have a certain experience. And we take that very seriously as well, which is why we have lifetime warranties on our product. But yeah, it's the Canada Goose, the name Canada Goose, gives us that ability to have that local relevance.
That's why I'm experiencing myself by having Canada Europe Economic Chamber. There's a sympathy about Canada. They want to know more. People in Europe, they know Canada, obviously, since a long time, but they don't know much of Canada. So very often I'm talking about Canada. Oh yeah, Canada is the greatest country in the world. Oh yeah, well, have you been there? No, never. So it's we've got the branding of Canada is very good, but we've got to go beyond the sympathy and explain what it is and what are the people there are like, and the country itself. So that's talking about Canada and kind of representing our own country here in Europe. So I was sharing with you at my.
It's interesting, because we're doing, it involves a lot of different negotiations, whether with its retailers or distributors or different partners. And there is a sense of pride in terms of being Canadian and representing Canada and a Canadian brand. But the other privilege that I have is when we're opening stores and you're in front of a room full of new employees running a store in Hong Kong or in Tokyo, and you get to talk about the brand history, and so much goes into manufacturing, building, designing, marketing our product, and creating something special. You want to make sure that final leg of the final stretch, that when they're in front of that consumer, they have this amazing experience. And being Canadian, growing up Canadian, I'm also made in Canada, being able to inspire those people to create great moments. What's that?
Me too, believe it or not.
Okay. Yeah, we're all made in Canada, I guess. Then. Okay, so but it is a really exciting to light a fire and those people, get them excited about the brand, so that when consumers come in, they can create a great moment as well. So yeah, it's really
great.
good.
Next question. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, a very actual question and a tricky one. Back to present time and different reality for everybody. How Canada Goose adapted to the COVID-19 crisis in Canada and Europe. I know you've talked about it a bit into the manufacturers panel, but if you can get back to it with me here.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's been a journey for all of us on a professional level and a personal level in so many ways. I mean, we go back to where we were at in March, in our headspace in March. We were just dealing with the new realities of what was hitting all of us in so many different capacities. We did shut down our facilities. We shut down everything, and then we started with the Canada Goose Response Program, where we opened up 2 facilities, 50 people, just to do protective garments for medical staff.
Wow.
PPE. And so we did about 10,000 units out of those 2 facilities. And since then, we've done around over 2 million pieces. We've got 9 facilities on the go, 800 employees. So we're very active with the response program as we've scaled back our regular manufacturing. So there's certainly demand out there for it. We're proud that our employees are also proud that we got to participate in that. I like the fact that it's one of these small things, but I love the fact that at the way Canada Goose did it, we didn't put logos all over everything or on the outside of the product. It's just very subtle inside. It's the Canada Goose Response Program, which is, to me, it's just very, very Canada Goose of us to not make a huge deal out of it, and just doing because it's the right thing to do. And we had the ability to do that and the infrastructure to do that in a very quick way.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything. And
for one last point on the COVID, because I think as leaders we're all going through this together, and we're very self-reflective on how we're navigating the new realities of COVID. And there were some great comments on the last panel as well on this. But engagement with employees is more important than ever. So we've really over-indexed in terms of transparency, engagement. We're doing surveys with our staff. We're highly visible. We have in our internal internet, we have people can submit any questions anonymously. So we're being highly transparent, while at the same time trying to keep us all very much laser focused, especially in our peak season, on continuing our momentum right now. So I think there were some great comments on the last. I think it was Christiane had some great comments on the last panel, which is very relevant, and I could really relate to what she was saying.
Great. In my intro of the summit, I talked about the situation, COVID-19 crisis, and as entrepreneurs, has got to adapt in every realities in order to move forward and to be successful. So what will be next for Canada Goose? You've talked about opening up in Berlin, and what's next for the European market and maybe elsewhere?
Yeah, well, our number one focus as a business unit this year, as an international team, is to expand our e-commerce. So we're opening up to the world. We're opening up a lot of new markets, but we're also operating and over-indexing on our existing markets. More people are online than ever, and we need to be there making sure there's these great experiences. So we're expanding our store reach, creating great moments, but we're really optimizing our e-commerce business, as we should, as any brand should be doing now more than ever. So our digital, that whole ecosystem is more important than ever for us. In terms of brick and mortar retail expansion, we're building off of that really strong wholesale foundation. In Europe, we're with the best, I believe, the best retailers in the world, whether it's Selfridges, Harrods, Peton, Galeries Lafayette, they're all there. We've got some really strong retailers that we work with in KaDeWe in Germany. There's a lot of them. And we're building on that foundation by expanding our store reach. We're excited about Berlin, and there's more announcements to be coming out in the near future.
That's great. That's great. And another tricky one, what changes will you implement in order to be more environmental friendly and to be fully animal friendly too?
Yeah. So I think it's really important that sustainability is not new for us as a business. So as I mentioned before, we've been making a product with a lifetime warranty. We use the best materials. We want things to last. We're not into disposable fashion and that sort of thing. So I think that's really important. We've done we have our resource centers. We also are partners with Polar Bears International, which will let us a specific colorway and a specific disc. So with Polar Bears International, we commit a significant amount of dollars every year to support the polar bears and avoid the melting of the ice. So it's a big focus for us. We've been doing this for many years. But I think most importantly, this spring we announced our sustainability impact strategy. And these are very hard commitments with very hard timelines. They're not something abstract or extremely long term. They're immediate and they're things that we're working on right now. So there's 5 specific things that I'm going to speak to. I'm going to read them because I want to make sure I'm getting this right and I'm doing this, giving us the focus it deserves. The first one is
we have time. So
okay. Well, I want to give it justice because it's important to us. And like I said, sustainability is not new for us. But I think that this impact strategy is something we take very seriously and we're very committed to. This is the first one. So in terms of, we want to be carbon neutral. So net zero direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. That's an 80% reduction. Again, these aren't long-term abstract things. This is 2025. We believe that's very soon. We are making a significant shift to using reclaimed fur. So we'll be using reclaimed fur in our supply chain in 2022, and we will end using new fur. So we'll be using only reclaimed fur within our network. So we're introducing this year a fur buyback program. We'll be buying fur back from our consumers and building that supply. By 2021, so we want to be, so I don't know if anyone's familiar with RDS, so Responsible Down Standards. We want to be certified by 2021 by Textile Exchange. The fourth thing is we want to be Boucsein approved, which is a responsible and sustainable practice by 2025 at 90%. And then the fifth one is that we're eliminating all single-use plastics in all of our Canada Goose facilities. So, like I said, these are strong commitments that we're certainly taking very seriously.
So 2025 is going to be a big year for Canada Goose, big shifts.
Well, so is this year. So is this year, because these things take time to implement, and we're in transition. Like I said, we're introducing the fur buyback program as we speak, and our supply chain will significantly change, and we're planning for that.
What are the corporate values that made you different from other companies coming from North America, not only Canada, but North America, because you're competing with everybody? I mean,
yeah,
it's a reality.
Yeah, it was an interesting question, and I our values are entrepreneurship, accountability, passion, respect, and innovation. Those are our corporate values. But the reality is that in a high growth company, you amplify those at certain times. So I think it's the combination of those things, over-indexing on some than others at critical times throughout the journey. I think the most important thing for us as a high growth company has been our culture and our company culture. And whether it's through the Bain period, the going public period, the COVID period, that culture is that glue. And that's what's been so exciting about coming over here over the last few years, is that it's Canada Goose. We have a Canada Goose culture, but it's also the European interpretation of that culture. And it's exciting for me, as there's 90 people here. I'm one of 2 Canadians, but to work so closely with Europeans and see them embrace what Canada Goose is in its own sort of European way has been really exciting for me. So, but I would say that certainly when you're high growth, entrepreneurship is huge. The cultural complexity, respect really matters, where you focus on people bring a lot of different skill sets to the table from multiple different cultures. So making sure you have a very respectful workplace is really important. We sell product. We have to be highly innovative. The consumer has such high expectations, and we need to deliver on that. So product innovation or innovation in general really matters. There has to be certainly a high level of accountability, and I think passion speaks for itself. If you can't be mediocre in any way these days in this business, whether you're a retailer or a brand. So we really want to maintain and make sure we're inspiring people to be passionate. That really matters.
And do you think by being in Europe that pushes you to go further into quality matters or design matters, fashion matters?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The European consumer is they really embrace authenticity. They have a very keen eye for design. The brand started this. Like I said, it's earlier. The idea of Canada Goose, it really started in Scandinavia, where we saw it resonate with Danny, seeing consumers walking around in these jackets. It's really started there. So there's certainly a lot to be said for the European consumer and the amount of influence they have on our business.
We've talked about Berlin coming soon. What about, I've got to ask you, Eastern Europe? What are the plans? And how's the market there? Let's talk about how do you evaluate, from your point of view, the market, marketingly speaking, as the difference of cultures, ability to buy those parkas or anything else, actually, just as a broader image of that market. What's your point of view for Eastern Europe?
For Eastern Europe, there is such a massive opportunity for us in Eastern Europe. Russia alone is a massive opportunity. Again, there's a lot more complexity to these markets in some aspects. We're still in many ways just getting started in markets we're currently active in. We started off as a sales agents selling to wholesale, expanding our retail footprint, expanding e-commerce. So we're just starting to open up these Eastern European markets now from an e-commerce perspective, this year in particular, which is very exciting. Russia, we partner with Zoom, which is the luxury retailer and the major player in Russia. So we see a lot of demand for the product, the weather's relevant, and we're getting there. We're going to do it properly, and we're going to do it the right way. What's really important to us is that people are getting a great experience. And based on our manufacturing, based on our approach, we'll do it very carefully, and we want to make sure we create great moments for consumers.
And you talked early on about going forward with more e-commerce and selling through the internet. Are you using a specific platform, or is it through your website?
We're doing it on our own.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's interesting because Farfetch is also doing that. They're running e-com for other actual wholesale partners. We are going on our own. We're doing it on our own, and which also you can imagine the complexities that creates from a logistics, compliance, legal perspective. But we believe we have a great story to tell, and we want to tell it. And it's amazing. We're known as a parka brand, and we're evolving into new categories like knitwears, eventually footwear, which we're working on. So we're like any good brand or any good retailer, we're evolving to new categories. It's still amazing to see whether it's Hawaii, some of the warmest places in the world, people buying Canada Goose. It's incredible. Across the Middle East, Australia, it's amazing to see. There's lots of interest out there, and in many ways, we're just getting started.
So being cold is very different from a place to another.
Cold is relative. Cold is certainly relative. That's one thing I've learned living in Canada, going to the north.
Yeah.
When I'm here in Switzerland and people complain about the cold, I'm like, that's not really that cold. Cold is relative.
And I was saying back where in Canada, at least it's not humid, which is not the case. It's humid too. But talking about humidity, when are you going to open up in Brussels here? Belgium. What's the market like? How do you evaluate? And Netherlands maybe.
Netherlands is also on the radar. We are, like I said, we've got London right now. We've got Paris.
Yeah.
We've got Milan, and we're about to open Berlin. And there's more announcements to be made.
That's very new. It's less than 1 year or less than 2 years. All those boutiques in Milan, Paris.
These are new. And the good thing is that we have such strong wholesalers all across the European store network that are creating those moments for us. And we want to build on that foundation. So I can tell you there's more to be done. Germany's an incredible market for us. There's 83+ million people. And we're not even active there yet with the store. We're about to be. But there's some great, and there's so much opportunity there, along with a lot of other countries, including Belgium, including the Netherlands. So in many ways, I know you see the disc quite a bit, but in a lot of ways, we're still creating a lot of first impressions of the brand, which is why that first touch point, that first experience means so much.
Good. And you've talked about it probably in the manufacturers panel. Maybe I'm not aware about your answers because I was, struggling to settle technical issues from a panel to another. I was kind of like a TV producer, trying to make things right. But how do you compare to outsourcing production to Asia or anywhere else? Because I think producing mostly 90% of your production is based out of Canada, 10% in Europe, from what I understand. What is the value behind that? What was the cultural value of doing that instead of outsourcing your production line into Asia, by example?
Well, I mean, it's from a quality perspective, it's an incredible part of the brand. The fact that it's made in Canada, it's not just the fact that it's made there, it's also the people that actually make it there have been doing it for a long time. The company's been around since 1957. They know how to make parchment. So that expertise is not just a tagline, it's real and it's meaningful. So that expertise is generational and it's something we've been building on. And we've been physically scaling that manufacturing ability. So we're physically expanding our footprint. We're physically committing space to teach people how to sew to that standard. So there's a massive investment of infrastructure in Canada to do this. Canada's also a very safe and low risk country to scale your manufacturing as well. We are committed to making the best product in the best places. We have 7 facilities in Europe where we make our knitwear because it's the best place in the world to make knitwear. And there's a lot of benefits to working in Europe with European manufacturers. We have 5 facilities in Italy. The owners are right there, so you can pick up the phone and talk to an owner who's on the floor most of the time. And so there's great response, there's flexibility. So from a production standpoint, we're not completely reliant on. If you want scale and pure volume, then that's your business model. Then you go overseas and you do your thing. For us and what we're trying to sell and what we're about, we want to go to the best places in the world to make the best product, which is a completely different philosophy. But we feel really good about the setup we have between Europe and Canada.
So that's a quality statement, but also my question was underlying another question about, it's kind of a marketing statement as well, producing in Canada, selling in Europe, by example, it just gives, it markets the quality of your products in Europe, I guess. It's a question.
Yeah, absolutely. The made in Canada 100% resonates with European consumers. It resonates around the world, but I think in particular it really resonates with the European consumer. The fact that this item is made in Canada and you're getting a piece of Canada with this item, with this jacket.
So part of that, the cost of producing in Canada could be spent into the marketing, branding of the products, could be considered part of the production. Let's say it's cost $400. You spend $100 on marketing because it's based or it is produced in Canada. So it's kind of so if you're counting as an accountant the production or the cost of the production, it's 100% cost of Canada and all costs related to that. But marketing speaking, it's an advantage and it makes your brand sells more in Europe and all over the world, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. It's certainly a major part of this story, and there's certainly financial considerations too. But it's also, it's an expensive endeavor to build that infrastructure in Canada, to make it in Canada, to train all these people. It's key to who we are.
I'm surprised because I thought that there would be some questions from the audience where there's no question actually. So I invite you, there's about 10 minutes or so left into the panel. If you have questions, don't hesitate. And since we're waiting for questions, as I went through all the questions I had to ask, what would be the question you would like to be asked actually from a Canadian or European point of view that you've never been asked before?
Well, the Canada Dry thing was certainly interesting. I think the next natural question is, if you look at what brands are doing right now, every brand is it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to be, you can't be mediocre anymore as a brand. And I think one thing that we continue to do is evolve into new categories. So there could be questions around what our plans are for footwear, other new category expansions, how we're evolving as a brand. We just don't want to be a seasonal brand. We have our highest growth coming out of spring, knits, other categories. So if you're going to open a store all year round, have this retail network, you need to become relevant all year round, which we're seeing some great momentum in new seasons and new product types.
Good. Very.
By the way, I also want to thank Alexandra. She's been a real support today. I'm sure she's been navigating a few IT hiccups, but she's been fantastic.
Oh yeah. I couldn't have done it without her. I mean, she was a big help. So technically speaking, yeah, thank you. You give me the chance to thank officially Alexandra. So it was a pleasure talking to you and talking to you and interviewing you. I hope for the best for Canada Goose in Europe, continuing the coverage of the European market. And you just show an example of a Canadian company that went out there, I mean, far away, Europe, with cultural differences, different time zones, different realities within Europe, within certain states of Europe. There are parts of those countries that are very, specific. So, but you're an example that we can definitely go there and have a success storyline to tell. So thank you again. And to everybody that are still online, thank you for being there, and see you next time, which will be next year for a EU-Canada Business Summit. But until then, there will be some conferences, seminars, and other things to come. So thank you again, and see you pretty soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.